not rhythmic, it's lagging. So, and go.
And go. Okay. I'm looking to see if it's on my page. Okay, there it is. All right, guys, how you doing this evening? Thank you for joining us. Tonight, we're having an urban apologetics symposium on social justice and confronting white supremacy. So please pull up a seat, share this video with as many people as possible because we're going to delve into some very interesting and timely subjects tonight. And all of the speakers are prepared to speak from the heart as well as from their very intelligent intellectual minds. And so without further ado, I'll just have each speaker introduce himself and we'll get started. So anybody just jump in and introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Isaiah Robertson, nobody special, pastor in the city of Cartersville, Georgia, Macedonian Missionary Baptist Church. And I also lead an organization entitled Black Church Empowered. And the goal of the organization is to do whatever we can to ensure that the Black church flourishes in the 21st century and beyond. So that's who I am.
My name is Damon Richardson. I am the founder of Urban Logia. We're an online theological and apologetics resource, and also a Bible teacher and preacher.
I am BK Apologists, just regular Joe Christian out here trying to defend and convey the faith.
And I'm Adam Coleman with True ID Apologetics. And just a guy out here trying to do the same. Love y'all, man. Thanks for having me.
All right. My name is Vocab, Phoenix, Arizona. I feel honored and privileged and blessed to be here amongst some wonderful people and really look forward to learning from y'all's wisdom tonight.
And for those of you who don't know, I go by Nephi. My name is also Nefertiti. I, just like the rest of the panelists, am an urban apologist, but unlike some of them, I am not a pastor. I'm a layperson. And I'm really excited to talk to you guys tonight. So to get it started, we are going to first define some terms just to make sure that we're speaking a common language here when we refer to some of the things that we're going to be discussing this evening. So our format is gonna basically be a just jump in and answer type of deal. We will reserve a few minutes at the end for questions and try to pick up any that seem pertinent to what we're discussing at the moment if we see them come about. So the first term that we're going to define tonight is, let's go with racism. How do we define racism, guys? Don't be scared.
So that
actually
one
has
is
more than one definition. So I think canvas some. Yeah,
that one is a tough one for me. Historically, I've defined it as discrimination based on racial power. But after reading How to Be an Anti-Racist by Kendi, I think my definition is broadened a bit to include anyone who harbors racist ideas. And so I'm still kind of developing my thought around the definition of that word racism. But I would definitely believe that it's a multifaceted definition, which includes racial power, but also, includes harboring, racist ideas and broad brushing an entire people group.
Yeah, it's definitely a nuanced definition because there's an individual form of racism, which is just basic prejudice. I hate you based on your phenotype, social status, But then there's systemic racism, like Jim Crow and apartheid, right? So there's layers. So that's why I think it's so important for us to define the term, because when someone says somebody's being racist, there is different connotations to that word. So it's always good to ask people what they mean when they say racist or racism.
Yeah, I just want to add to that too, that I think part of the problem with the term racism or racist, and to be honest with you, in some ways, I think it's somewhat outdated in the sense that I think sometimes what we are trying to point to when we use the term racism or racist, in the minds of people that hear that word, they like when somebody says racist or racism, they think like somebody, in a KKK uniform, burning the cross in somebody's yard or something like that. That's typically like what people think about when they think racism. But we understand how racism has changed and, you know, manifests itself in different ways over time. And I'm just thinking specifically in the Western context, it's much more than that, you know. And so I think, you know, so for example, like the first, you know, slave owners who are, bringing slaves from West Africa, they didn't necessarily have as much of an emotion-based hatred towards, you know, Africans. It was just, we think that we better than y'all and we can do what we want to do with you, you know. But that emotion-based racism kind of crystallizes and matures over time until you get to like the 60s, you know, and where you see like, you know, Bull Connor and things of that nature. So I think that, I'm saying this for a reason, because I think sometimes people, they think that if I'm not, you know, Bull Connor and I'm not running around here with a, you know, Ku Klux Klan uniform on, then I'm not racist, you know. But we have to understand that racism has texture. And so, you know, modern day, I think it often looks like apathy, you know, towards injustices towards African Americans or the minorities, you know, or harboring erroneous beliefs about African Americans and other minorities. So if you believe, then, for example, like, so let me be clear. I'm not going to try to belabor the point, but, you know, back in the day, there was this justification for slavery and Jim Crow with, you know, ideas like, you know, Black people are lazy, they're dangerous, they're, you know, ne'er-do-well, and they're, you know, so on and so forth. Well, those ideas are still, you know, swirling around and about in society. And some people believe those things about African Americans with no justification whatsoever, but they're still harboring, you know, these wrong ideas about Black people. You know, Black people are not to be trusted, or they're dramatic with respect to incidences where there's police misconduct, you know, things of that nature, you know, just wrong ideas. And so I think that we want to capture ideas like that as being an aspect of racism as well. So I don't want to be too cloudy about it, but I just want to clarify that just because you're not, you know, burning a cross in somebody's yard doesn't mean that your thoughts and actions aren't stained with racism.
Yeah, I would add to that you know, if we're going to have a broad definition of racism, that we have to start with what it looks like in our context, because it makes no sense for us to define racism in another context when we're talking about what it looks like here. And so from that starting point, we have to include in the definition of racism dominant culture. Because if you don't have a dominant culture, you really don't have racism. And now that's the tough part of the conversation to have, because people are, you know, so willing to say that anybody can be a racist. And while that is true from a potential standpoint, anybody can be racist. Every single person has the ability to be a racist. But in the context of America, everybody is not a racist. When you start talking about the dominant culture and you talk about the internalized beliefs, the internalized ideologies, the power, the privilege, and the practices, everybody then is not a racist. And so from a dominant culture standpoint, racism can only be practiced by persons in the dominant culture in this context. That does not mean that only people in the dominant culture can be racist, but in the context of America, the only racist in America are those from a dominant culture. Now, again, because racism does involve prejudice, can anybody be prejudiced? Absolutely. Blacks, whites, Hispanics, you name it, every ethnicity, every cultural group, everybody can be prejudiced. Everybody can even exhibit racial prejudice. But when you talk about racism, racism is a component of a number of different elements that belong to the dominant culture. Let me give you a quick example of that, right? So when we say, so everybody gets it when you say classism, right? So now when we say classism and then we look in, for instance, India, and we look at the caste system and we look at all of the different classes of people. So if you take somebody at the highest end of the caste system and at the lowest end of the caste system, those people at the very lowest end are oppressed severely, they are mistreated, they are disenfranchised, so forth and so on, right? So is it possible for people on the lower end of the case system to dislike and to hate the people on the highest end of the case system? Absolutely. Can they literally call them names that are racial? Absolutely. But can they be classist against them? The answer is no. And everybody seems to understand that when we're talking about classism, because the only way that people on the lowest end of the case system can be classist is that they are in a position of power whereby their beliefs, their ideas, and their practices can disenfranchise and ill affect another group in their same culture. And the people on the lowest end of the case system, no matter how negatively they think about their oppressors, they still can't, by virtue of merely thinking negatively about them, be classist, because they are not in a position, they have no privilege, and none of their ideas can put anybody on the highest end of the case system in a negative position. And so when we really stretch out the definition of racism, we have to understand how it works in this context. That is really, in a nutshell, what racism is in the United States of America.
I guess I'm last. Racism is a violation of many, many biblical principles, and it's a unfounded and indeed unjust bigotry towards a people group based upon ungodly deciding factors. And when I think about this issue, a big problem I have is the way it does not respect God's choice, does not respect his sovereignty. And let me show you what I mean by that. Acts 17:24-28. Here, Paul, a Jew, a Hebrew man, is speaking to Greeks, pagan, Gentile, heathen, Stoic, Epicurean philosophers, right? Look what he says to them in Acts 17:24. The God who made the world and everything in it. And indeed, Paul is going to imply further on and elaborate everyone in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, he's the master, does not live in temples made by hand, but does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything. He's complete in himself, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. Paul's tracing his thought all the way back to Genesis there. And when you get to Genesis, you get to Genesis 1:26-27, which I know is going to come up a number of times in this conversation, which is good. And he made from one man every nation of mankind. So obviously referring to Adam, everyone comes from Adam and Eve to live on all the face of the earth. God wanted them spread out, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place. God sovereignly chose the culture everybody would be born in, the time, the place. And we got to respect that. And indeed, it's not something I think we should sort of okay, this is something to celebrate in. This is related to God's beautiful creativity and beautiful majesty in his image bearers. Racism perverts this. It destroys this. It ignores this. That they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him, yet he is actually not far from each one of us. That's good stuff. And racism flips that on its head.
I think it's really interesting and important that we started off by identifying terms and we just spent, I don't know how long, on racism alone. I think that is an illustration of just how complex this conversation can tend to be. And so oftentimes we have these very simplistic ideas, things are very straightforward, ABC, but that's just not the case, especially when we're dealing with a mixture of religion, and temporal issues such as race. Sometimes politics plays a role in this as well. What we're seeing in society right now definitely has a lot of political elements to it. And so once again, this is not just black and white copy and paste type of situation. And every person is going to have certain nuanced perspectives based on their own experiences and their knowledge. So we defined racism. We're now going to define what social justice is. Since this is a symposium on social justice, what is social justice, brethren?
I'd answer that real quick. Social justice is essentially the right for every person in a society to have access to economic opportunities, social opportunities, justice, and and education. So social justice deals with the right for everybody in that society to have equitable access to those things.
The definition that I like to use for social justice, and it's really quick. It's simply God's righteousness applied socially through human agency and advocacy. So for me, I see an injustice, and ultimately is unrighteous before the eyes of God. And that unrighteousness or that injustice is not going to be rectified on its own. It's going to take human agency and human advocacy to ensure that that unrighteousness and injustice is addressed. As in the case of Act 6 and the Hellenized Jews, they had to be advocated for. A meeting had to be called, and that had to be rectified through human advocacy. So I would simply define social justice as God's righteousness applied socially through human agency and advocacy.
Yeah, I would add to that too. I think that, well, of course, I've got the real you, Imago Dei. That's the name of my show. Imago Dei meaning image of God. And while we throw that term around a lot, I mean, I think sometimes we just really haven't committed a lot of study to it. And when I look into that term, actually, it's kind of a compilation of ideas all packed in there. One of which is this notion that mankind has been given this collective project to steward the earth in a way that is representative of God and his nature. That's what mankind is supposed to be doing, down here. Now, obviously, given the fall, there's all sorts of things that are contrary to God's nature. Nevertheless, that mandate is still there. It's our proper function, if you will, is to be stewarding the earth in ways that reflect God's nature. Now, as an aspect of that, when you see injustice, that's something that goes against God's nature. And then, I would argue that it is our biblical duty, to seek justice in all contexts that we find ourselves in, and thus be proactive in bringing about justice where justice is being reflected. With that being said, I want to be clear, actually now Quentin Rogers is going to joke with me because he says I say that all the time. I want to be clear that of what justice is not.
He did call you on that.
He did call me on that. Yeah, he did.
Yeah,
he did.
It's kind of funny.
I want to be clear on what social justice is not. When people hear the term social justice nowadays, they immediately associate it with some sort of leftist, liberal agenda, that encompasses all things like homosexuality and everything else. That is not what we mean when we're talking about social justice. We're talking about living out the biblical ethic. That's what we're talking about. As I think it's attributed to Martin Luther King, justice is what love looks like in public. That's what we're talking about. Now, it is the case that certain leftists and liberals have hijacked the language of social justice, biblical justice. They've hijacked the language of justice and in their own worldly caricaturish way attempted to mimic what biblical justice looks like. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the people of God living out the biblical ethic and being proactive in exercising that biblical mandate to bring about the reign of God and the justice of God in any given context. So I think we have to be really careful not to allow worldly groups to try to hijack the language of Scripture And ultimately, we really need to reclaim what it is that the Bible is saying and live it out.
And amen. If I could share, talk about social justice, I mean, really, it's a command of Scripture. So this is, a command. What's been talked about here, and let me show people just a few places. Hopefully you guys already know these scriptures, but it's always good to see these again. One place is Jeremiah 22:3, and look what it says here, and you see how strong and important it is to God. Thus says the Lord, do justice. So it's action. See, there's action here. Do justice and righteousness. That means you're doing righteousness. I understand we think about being righteous, and that's legit, but here it's do justice and you're doing righteousness. So do justice and righteousness, and deliver from the hand of the oppressor him who has been robbed. So I know some people, the second they hear someone talk about oppression, they think all of a sudden you must be a Marxist. Well, it's right here in the Bible to talk about the oppressor. Deliver. That means you're going to make this right. You're going to figure this out. You're going to help this be. And notice it's the person who didn't do it. It's not, you did it. Hey, it's someone who did not do it. So there's a hand of the oppressor, and you're in some way trying to deliver them. You guys, I hope people see that, and deliver from the hand of the oppressor him who has been robbed, and do no wrong. And by the way, where it says robbed, some people think a lot of times rob, hey, give me your money, whatever. Notice this is an oppressor robbing. So it's some other means, right? Through systems and different things like that. The oppressor, him who has been robbed, and do no wrong or violence to the resident alien, the fatherless, and the widow, nor shed innocent blood in this place. Notice the three groups mentioned there: resident alien, fatherless, widow. They're people who are extremely vulnerable in society. And not only that, Isaiah 1:17, learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, plead the widow's cause. You're standing up for those who, in this case, cannot stand up for themselves. Micah 6:8, he has told you, oh man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? So this is requirement, but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God. I just wanted to share those.
Amen. Amen. I loved all of that. Those are things that are actually going to come up again later as we continue to explore and discuss how it is that we confront these things. The fact that you pointed out that there are commands in there, I think is extremely important, but I don't want to, give any spoilers here. So we just have two more terms to define before we dive into the conversation. And again, these are terms that we have to define because we're having a conversation about them. So the subtitle to this presentation is Confronting White Supremacy. So brothers, I'm going to ask BK to go first. What is white supremacy? I'm only picking on you because I haven't heard much from you so far.
That's fine. That's fine. For me, white supremacy is a direct rebellion against the identity that God has given us. It is a trapping in which it has convinced images of God that they are nothing more than crayons, and that the white crayon is the best crayon in the box. And when you do that, you strip people from their intrinsic value, because crayons are nothing more than things, right? And we use things. We're not supposed to use people, we use things. But if you believe that person is an object, then there's no moral objection to what you do to that person. And if you see yourself as a crayon, as a thing, then you have no remorse for what you do to that other crayon. So white supremacy is in direct defiance of being the Salem of God, being the Imago Dei. Yeah, so that's
Yeah. Good.
If I can jump
Can I
in.
say so? Oh,
Go ahead. No, go ahead, AC. Go ahead, bro.
I can be brief on this one. I just want to, just kind of add in this piece that now hear me out clearly, right? Because some people are going to, anyway, I'll just go ahead and say it. So all cultures typically esteem themselves, right? In any given context, if you go to, all cultures do that. That in and of itself is not necessarily a problem, right? Where it becomes a problem is twofold. Number one, when you do like Alfredo just described, is where you go from esteeming your culture or your people group and then kind of weaponize that such that you imply or explicitly convey to others that they are less than. That's number one, right? When you take your esteem and then you kind of weaponize it against others, that's when it becomes a problem, right? Secondly, when you take that step of not just weaponizing it and sort of, well, we're just better than you, but then you maybe instantiate that in laws per se, and tie somebody's race, or somebody who's just not of your group, if that is tied in some way to how things work out legally, economically, the distribution of power and so forth, then now you've gone from just esteeming oneself to maybe in some sort of emotional or softer way, levying that against other people, to now you just straight up becoming an oppressor on that basis. So to be more explicit, when you think about, the founding of America, initially you could not be a citizen of America and you could not be recognized as a citizen unless you were a free white male. Okay. So citizenship rights was tied to one's race initially. It wasn't until later on that you see a change in the what they call the naturalization laws and clauses. Okay. When you think about the fact that, when this country was founded, obviously, the vast majority of people of African descent over here would have been owned as property and construed as being, if not outright less than human, something along those lines, right? So if you have somebody who's being owned as property and they don't have the right to go out and purchase and freely attain property like everybody else, well, now race has these direct economic implications. Okay, the same thing is going to be rippled up through the civil rights, the Jim Crow era and so forth. So you see race tied to what somebody is able to have, being able to pursue that life, liberty, and happiness, right? Well, everybody wasn't able to do that because some people didn't meet the racial qualifications that were set forth in this society. So when you think about white supremacy, it's not just some sense of haughtiness on the basis of being white. You're dealing with something that over time has been instantiated in law and has had economic and political ramifications, and we could go further than that. But it's more bare knuckle than just I like me better than I like you. There's much more to that.
Yeah, piggyback off of what Adam said. Superiority complex is actually a psychological term. It's a disorder. It's a superiority complex, and so I think of white supremacy as like a white superiority complex that's manifested through individuals, through groups, through systems, through structures. And white supremacy doesn't just impact and affect white people. The reason why I describe it as a white superiority complex manifested through individuals and not just white people is because a Black person can harbor white supremacist attitudes. Hispanic can harbor white supremacist attitudes. So it is a complex that is manifested through individuals, groups, systems, and structures in this country and in this world.
Absolutely. Yeah, I want to definitely ride in on what has been said so far and say, of course, it's, we've identified the fact that it's this ethnic superiority ideology, but this ideology works itself out in culture, right? So this is what it looks like. So when you start talking about white supremacy, it's this idea that a certain ethnic group or a certain race is superior to others, but superior in what ways? And so then it internalizes these ideas that this particular people group are intrinsically, that is by nature, better. We are smarter, we're stronger, so forth and so on. And so what that ends up looking like in society is that wherever white people are, they should be the leaders, right? And so this is an idea that sometimes is so normal for white people to think that it's easy for them to say, I'm not a racist, because they identify racism with overt acts of, spray painting swastikas or whatever, calling somebody the N-word. But white supremacy kind of thinking is this notion that I am better, right? And so white people may even like black people, but it doesn't mean that they see them as equal to who they are. And so what are some of the ways that white supremacy plays itself out in society? Well, if you look back in the the early 19th century, you had Manifest Destiny, whereas America believed that it had a God-given destiny to expand into territories and literally take over areas that were owned by other people. It was our God-given who? So they literally believe, in other words, white people believe that it is our manifest destiny to take over and to spread our ideology, our power, to exert force and control over and expand into other areas. That's also another word for colonialism. And so as Pastor Isaiah said, other cultures can take on this idea of white supremacy. And that is that not only when they begin to see themselves as inferior to whites, but that they begin to see whites as superior to everybody else. And so oftentimes we find Africans, people from various African nations will come over, and because they have been so colonized by Europeans, they come over looking down upon African Americans. That is a white supremacy kind of mindset. You even find some people in the Caribbean that do the very same thing, but you find African Americans here, right? So for instance, you'll find so African Americans, again, this is a very nuanced topic, but you might find African Americans who will attend a church that is led by, for instance, a white pastor. I find absolutely no problem with that. But then we've got to deal with African Americans who believe that they need to be led by a white pastor because white people lead better than black people. You see what I mean? And so these are the kind of black people. So when we're talking about racism, we not only have to deal with the issue of white supremacy as it relates to white people literally embodying that type of ideology, but then we've got to deal with its impact on African Americans and what it does to dumb down their way of thinking and their way of relating to other African Americans. So white supremacy could play out even in church, where African Americans think like, oh, we've got to abandon the black church. The black church is just not spiritual enough. It just doesn't preach the gospel. It doesn't have the right doctrine, and this, that, and the other. And it begins to measure and literally look at black expressions of Christianity over and against normatized and standardized expressions of Christianity as practiced by white people. So whereas black people are singing in the choir, oh, it's not enough scripture in the song, they're singing too loud, we don't need all of that, it doesn't. And again, what are they comparing it with? They're comparing it with a superiority kind of complex that tells them that the right way to do it is the equivalent of making whiteness orthodoxy, right? And that is why it is essentially racism and white supremacy is essentially a false gospel if you are understanding it in its right, not just in a social sense, but in a theological sense. It's a false gospel. And so these are some of the ways that it plays out in this colonialistic kind of culturally captive way of thinking that not only impacts the way white people perceive reality in the world, but the way black people perceive themselves in that same world and in those same spaces.
Actually, and I want to be, clear on this too. I mean, like you said, this can play out in so many different ways. I mean, I think about just, the so-called like kind of good hair movement that we've seen, or natural hair movement that we've seen here recently. That's an expression of, kind of bucking against a particular form of white supremacy, where the notion that the blonde haired, blue-eyed, woman is, aesthetically the ideal, I mean, that's what comes along with it. Now, here's the thing, maybe I shouldn't say, I don't know if I should say this or not, but, as a black man, I'm saying, like, my ideal is a black woman. That's what I'm attracted to. Right. And there's nothing wrong with that. But once I take that and then I begin to layer on this extra notion that, okay, not only is it my ideal, But if somebody of another culture doesn't meet this ideal, then they're not beautiful. You know what I'm saying? Now it's become, this notion has become insidious. It's become something that militates against the Imago Dei, right? And I can point to other examples too. I mean, we could talk about other examples, but I'm just saying that, to Damon's point about leadership even, right? How many movies do you watch? Or cartoons do your kids watch? Where there's a group of different individuals in the scene, and the leader is 99.9% of the times the white kid, right? Usually the black individual is going to be somebody who's strong, fast, or something like that. Maybe the Asian is going to be intelligent and have the glasses. I'm not trying to be racist, but I'm just saying this is what's depicted, in much of our media, right? And so what happens is, I bring this up because media becomes the vehicle through which white supremacist ideas become baked into, generations moving forward, right? So we have to be careful about that, and understand that as Christians, as believers, we need to be cognizant of these things, and anything that militates against the Imago Dei, in any way that one group is esteemed over another in such a malicious fashion, we ought to all, find it to be abhorrent. And if we don't, then we have to then look on the inside and ask the question, why is that?
Yeah, and you guys both bring up some really poignant, ideas and topics and thoughts around this. There's an issue that affects us in our communities, and it's the issue of colorism. Colorism is a derivative of white supremacy.
Right.
This idea that lighter skin is better, this brown bag test, this thought that, the lighter, the prettier, is a derivative of white supremacist attitudes. And this is something that still persists in our communities today, this scourge of colorism. It comes from white supremacy.
Okay,
Yeah,
well, amen. Anybody? Oh, go ahead, Velcat, please, by all means.
I think I should tack on this one. A couple people brought up the way that this very real issue, white supremacy, plays out in media and in culture, especially sort of in the West, and how it affects theology. And so, it's a very real issue for quite some time, how Jesus has been portrayed. For example, one of the best books on the subject, I really recommend everyone involved in urban apologetics get this, The Color of Christ. This book is just, it's the book, you may have seen the cover. Some people have seen it. I got the dust jacket off, but it's got that, except it's full color, a really cool little cover. But this book is really informative. And one thing that I saw was, even when you had depictions of Jesus that were, based upon some European model that weren't necessarily sort of hard edge white supremacists in their goal or intent, those images become normative throughout Western society with the dominance of Western media. And a lot of those images get co-opted by those who do have a harder edge white supremacist intent, even if it's sort of initially benign. Someone over here has just got a white model, so they paint them white, whatever. But it's a perpetual problem, and it becomes a very real problem in a lot of ways. And I think that's just one example, though. It's just really one example of many, not just the portrayal of Christ, but you have the portrayal of other folks. And because of sort of the success, if you want to call it that, of a lot of Western powers in the modern era, it sort of got spread all over the world. So you look at India media, they do not generally show the darker Indians. It's almost always lighter folks. Yes, there's issues of caste system as well, but it's the same when not just Spanish TV, Mexican TV. There's all folks looking all Spaniard. And I just think, it's kind of good to take these, sort of be aware of these things and realize, because it affects so much in our psyche. It affects so much about what we think is normal, natural. It affects these kind of things. And then we think ways and make certain statements without realizing things if we're not aware. And, it's unfortunate that we have to sort of end up thinking about these things in this way, but we have to we have to be cognizant of the world we're actually in, and it is one affected by these things in a very real way. And that's just the fact of the matter. And so when we do apologetics, when we do theology, when we do pastoral ministry in certain contexts, all of this, and it's wild, you know, this thing back and forth. This is the last thing I'm gonna say about this. It's wild to me that you just had that back and forth, Nefertiti, with Pastor Kelly Richardson, I think his last name. Wait, what was his last name? I forgot his last name. So maybe it wasn't whatever. Kelly Richards, who that guy.
It's
Pastor,
R. Kelly. Yeah.
okay, yeah. I always forget his last name. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I really ought to. But Pastor Kelly, he calls himself Pastor, whatever. But that back and forth, the person at Zondervan who answered about that entry was like, first of all, almost like it was almost, the answer was almost like, it's impossible that we could have ever produced anything racist. I mean, this was produced in the 60s, but that it is almost like this incredulity to the fact that maybe you did produce some stuff that has some racist, white supremacist overtones, right? Which they did. It's not really a if. The person there said, well, I've been here a long time and I've never heard about this. And again, I think they're genuine. Okay. I saw the response. I'm not impugning their motives, but a few things are interesting about that. One is that they've never heard this before. They've been there 40 years and they've never heard this. That's actually not good. There's a total lack of awareness of why does it say this under the definition of ham? Why does it say? Someone needs to explain why it says that. The answer is white supremacy, even if they're unaware. And that matters. That's a real thing. You know, we know about that little dictionary because the Hebrew Israelites love it. And they like to have a tattered copy out on the street, the One Wester guys, right? But, you know, the so-called non-campers do too in their videos. That's why we know about it. But it's been around since the 60s. Hebrew Israelites weren't the only people using that. My point is, imagine all the evangelicals, all the Christians, when they look up the definition of ham, for example, and that's what they see. And, you know, these are very real things. And so, we just got to wake up to the reality, no matter how it looks, and realize white supremacy affects and has affected the world we find ourselves in. So what's church going to do? Well, panels like this is a good start, but that's what
Vocab, you bring up a great point when you talk about, you know, white Jesus. I have a book coming out in August entitled Black Church Empowered. And in that book, I actually call for pastors of Black churches to take down images of white Jesus, because the image of white Jesus has been one of the greatest tools for white supremacy and white supremacists. I mean, just imagine this image of white Jesus hovering over Black bodies in a Black church, and that image being juxtaposed against sermons about a Black hell and people stained by sin. It does something to the Black psyche. So, you know, I definitely think a huge blow against white supremacy will be when every Black church eradicates the image of white Jesus from their sanctuary.
Right. And now that doesn't mean that you go make Jesus, you go put a Jerry curl on Jesus.
Right.
Yeah, we look like Billy D. Williams.
Looks like Billy D. Williams, if you ask me.
Here's the thing, though. Here's the thing, because we're talking about white supremacy. I find this interesting, that as soon as the discussion comes up about Jesus not being white, which nobody should believe. I mean, no intelligent person should believe that anyway, that he obviously wasn't a European, right? Now, that doesn't necessarily make him Black, but it definitely does make him Asiatic, which means that Jesus would have been of color. And everybody of color is not necessarily Black, but they are of color, which means that they are not white. And so there's a myriad of various complexions and hues that go into what it means to be colored, to be of color, right? So that much is clear. But as soon as we start having that conversation, the first thing that people with a white supremacist mindset want to start guarding against is, oh, but we got to be careful about Black Jesus. Well, you wasn't worried about Black Jesus for 150 years or 200 years in this country. You were fine saying nothing at all with Michelangelo Jesus. right? Buttermilk, butter toast Jesus, right? You will find as was it
Jerome Gay calls him Pantene Pro V.
Jesus, you will
Pantene Pro
find
V.
it, right? But as soon as somebody says, well, historically and geographically, that means Jesus would have been of color. Oh, now, be careful now, be careful. What do you mean be careful? Is it that this idea that all biblical characters are white is in jeopardy now? I mean, it's amazing that people are still making movies. You go look at Pure Flix or whatever, and all of the Jesus movies, all of the people still in 2020, all of these characters still look like they're from Scotland or Germany or England or wherever, right? And no matter how much you say this is historically and geographically incorrect, the reality is this: is that there is a mindset that wishes to control the narrative, so that if we can make every good person in Scripture look like us, it would follow then that goodness is white. It would follow then that right and righteousness is white. It would follow then that anything that might be evil, oh, the Egyptians, now we'll give you the Philistines, and we'll give you the Egyptians, and we'll give you the Canaanites. We'll give all the evil folks. We'll concede that they are black people, but everybody else, the Jews and everybody, the angels even, are white. Why is that? And as Vocab alluded, if you go centuries back, it just starts out as everybody wishing to portray God in essentially as a reflection of their own culture. But as you move into the West, it becomes a dominant narrative of white supremacy ideology. And the last bastion of racism in America is to tear down the image of the white Jesus, because that is the ideological pillar that holds up racism in America. Because, I mean, if, for God's sake, if God even looks like you, who are black people, to resist, to seek after justice, who are black people to seek after equality and equity, equity in this society. Who are we? If after all, even God looks like you, then you can understand the mindset of many in these evangelical bubbles that will say, well, it's just the sovereignty of God, and this is just the way that God has intended it, and this is just the way that you just have to just pray and just trust God and look in the hereafter for freedom and deliverance from it. It's no wonder that the very people who look in the mirror, who are being accused of these practices, would come up with a theology that benefits that kind of thinking. Not only do you have a God that looks like you, but then you've got a gospel that easily absolves you from guilt. That it's just, I'm forgiven, and I don't even need to do anything to rectify what I've done. And so not only is your Jesus the wrong Jesus, but your gospel is the wrong gospel. Because there is nothing in Scripture that frees people from responsibility simply because they've said, forgive me, Lord. No. That's not how it works. And when you read the gospel, you realize that with repentance, there is an expectation that there is an alignment of behavior that aligns and adjusts itself with the expectations of Scripture. And to simply say, I've been forgiven, and that's it, is just a truncated gospel. But it is the gospel of people who wish to remain dominant in their thinking, in their ideology. It is the gospel of people who find that who believe that they have no responsibility in doing right ethically by the people that they have oppressed. And people can argue that, well, I didn't do it, my great granddaddy, or whatever, or I'm from Yugoslavia, none of my people was over here, this, that, and the other. But at the end of the day, doesn't matter whether any of your ancestors were over here. If you are part of the dominant culture, then you are benefiting from the oppression of those that are part of your dominant culture group. You are benefiting, you are privileged as a result of that. And if you're not aware, woke, of those privileges and of that position and that leverage in society, then you'll start easily using that leverage and that privilege against people that look just like me. And so it doesn't matter whether your great granddaddy was a slave owner or not. If you are part of the dominant culture, you've got to be woke in the ways in which dominant culture thinking impacts people that are not in your group. That's what we're trying to say.
Can I read one paragraph from this? This is something people may be shocked at. How Black is the Gospel? Tom Skinner, former gang member from Harlem. They even made a little comic book about him. This book is from 1970. That's hard to believe that that was 50 years ago. And listen to this from page 13. Black America is not about to follow a white Christ. The image of a Christ pattern after Salmon's portrait is more than suspect. He was saying suspect back in 1970, man. Salmon, that's the kind of the really classic little white Jesus that got passed around on a lot of cards during the revivals and whatnot. Almost everyone here has seen him. It has become a contemptuous symbol to the Black man of all the fakery and chicanery endorsed by so many white Christians. Man, he was straight shooting in 1970. If Christ takes on the image of an Anglo-Saxon Protestant suburbanite, he's obviously not for Black men. It is inconceivable that this kind of Christ would die for Black people. The question is, of course, whether this view of Jesus Christ is true. Has Christianity become the worship of white, used as a tool of oppression to increase the Black man's burden? If, that's a key word, everyone, this is the last sentence, I just, audience, understand, he's saying if this be true, it is understandable that the Black man must find his salvation through worshiping Black. The point is, this white supremacy overladen on top of some version of Christianity is actually what creates some of the felt needs that the cults claim to answer. That's exactly what he's saying there. It's almost like he's predicting the rise of Hebrew Israelism and everybody else.
Yeah. The cults are the unpaid bills of the church.
That was really deep. Let's go into why, because I think that he kind of segued into this. Why then, we see that white supremacy is real. For those of you who are just joining us, we've defined the terms racism, we've defined white supremacy, we've defined social justice, and how far reaching a lot of these things are. So my question now becomes, why is this a particularly apologetics issue? Why are we holding a symposium as urban apologists to address social justice and white supremacy? Is this something that even belongs in this context in the church? Like, why are we talking about this?
Yeah, so I'll answer that quickly. Apologetics is to defend the faith, obviously to defend the historic claims of Christianity, and that is not only from those without, but from those within. And the fact is that why would we need to even defend? And that is because questions arise about the credibility and the veracity of Christianity, and racism as practiced by people who profess to be Christians causes Christianity to lose its witness in society. And it is an irrefutable and indisputable fact that white evangelicalism as practiced in America has caused Christianity to lose its witness and has created ideas about Christianity proper that are not true. And so urban apologetics, which is just an aspect of Christian apologetics, seeks to do apologetics in a particular cultural and geographical context, i.e., urban centers of America, right? And all of the thinking that goes on there. Well, in an urban context, Black and brown people are very skeptical of Christianity because they have seen these co-opted and truncated versions of Christianity hypocritically practiced by people who were not true representatives and ambassadors of Jesus Christ. They were misrepresenting Christ and the gospel of Christ with their racial hypocrisy. And so the reason that this is an apologetics issue is because racism is not just social, it is also theological. When Paul told Peter that not that he had strayed theologically from the gospel, but he said your actions are out of step with the gospel. It is the Greek word orthopodio, that is right and foot. In other words, you have not walked right. Notice, you can actually be out of line with the gospel by behavior while being in line with the gospel theologically. I want to serve notice that white evangelicals may be right theologically with the gospel, but they are out of step with the gospel in terms of orthopraxy, as well as in orthopathy. And so those two components are, according to Jesus's teaching, are just as important to not only the content of the gospel, as Dr. Tony Evans talks about, but also the scope of the gospel. And so this is in fact an apologetics issue because it's theological. And that's what apologists do, is we seek to straighten out issues theologically so that people can have the right belief and understand how to defend those beliefs biblically, historically, and socially.
The people that we want to minister to, the people that we want to see converted, they first want to see something from us. They want credibility and they want receipts, okay? And if we come to them with a gospel that's not credible, if we come to them in, whilst we're simultaneously avoiding or ignoring the Lord's words in Matthew 25, if we come to them with no receipts, and honestly, this is why you have a lot of Black millennials in limbo. They have left the Black church, some of them, but a lot of them haven't jumped on the Hebrew Israelite bandwagon yet. They haven't jumped on the conscious community bandwagon yet because there are absolutely no receipts there, right? None whatsoever. So they're still, they're still interested in what we have to say, but they don't just want words, they want receipts as well. The Black church has a history of receipts. We have receipts, buckets of receipts, but they don't just want that to be history, right? They want this to be continuing today. And that's why we've gathered here, and that's why we're advocating for what we're advocating for.
So the reason why we address white supremacy is because it is a sin issue. And the specific sin in question is idolatry, because it says that the identity that God has given you is incorrect. And this crayon color is the appropriate designation for you. So therefore, white supremacy knows something better than God does. Right? And we have brought into this crayon box. So much so that their whole entire worldviews that actually has its foundation in crayon colors. What do I mean? When you say that the black man is God and the white man is the devil, you're playing within the crayon box of white supremacy. So when we refute and we do an apologetic against certain Hebrew Israelites, because I don't know every Hebrew Israelite believes, but the one Westers, for instance, or the conscious community, what they don't understand is the reason why we refute them is because we're also, one, it's false doctrine, but also it's white supremacy. You're playing in the game of white supremacy, because what you're saying is you're not really against supremacy. You're just against who has the supremacy. You're not really against slavery, right? You're just against who gets to do the enslaving. So you have no higher moral ground to stand on. If your view of paradise is revenge, you're playing within the box of white supremacy. The answer of white supremacy is not black supremacy. You got to get out the box, because as long as you stay in the box, there's winners and losers. The gospel says get out the box and everybody wins. And that's the job of the urban apologist in any Christian, is to get people out of this box, to stop buying into this thing that's completely in rebellion to the designation that God has given us, which is, again, the solemn, the representative of the Creator himself. That's why we go at certain doctrines, because it's heretical and it's white supremacist in nature. So,
can I say one more thing?
I just want to add something.
Interject this real quick, Adam. I just want to interject this because I wanted to make this point earlier and forgot when I was talking about racism not just being social, but it being theological. Racism is essentially a false gospel, right? And so when you look at Galatians 2 or Galatians 1, 2, and in fact, all of Galatians, but particularly chapter 1 and 2, what Paul is coming against there is that the Galatians, that is the Gentile believers, were being seduced by the Jewish followers of Jesus in the believing that they needed to become Torah subscribers now that they have been saved, and that their salvation was in effect not complete without becoming Torah observant, right? And so Paul responds to them and he says, foolish Galatians, you know, who's seduced you, having begun in the spirit, thinking now that you can finish in the flesh? Well, here's why we need to do apologetics against racism, because what white supremacy, racism in this country is effectively says theologically is that having Jesus is not enough. You need to have Jesus and white normative behavior. You need to have Jesus and white culture. You need to have Jesus and white thinking. You need to have Jesus and white norms, so forth and so on. So anytime you add Jesus and something else, it becomes a false gospel. In the context of Galatians, it was Jesus and the law. Well, that's what made it false. Anything that comes apart or beyond more Jesus and something else is a false gospel. Jesus, and that's it. The Jesus is sufficient for salvation. There's nothing that you can do in your flesh. And so what racism essentially says is that you're not acceptable by merely being a Christian. You really need to be a Christian, but you need to take on white standards and white norms of behavior and of thinking, and you need to submit yourself to those things in order to become acceptable, which is why Black people tiptoe in white spaces, so that they do not interrupt, that they do not upset, that they do not offend, that they do not find themselves being fired or dismissed, because in order to be part of that circle, you've got to conform to these white norms and white standards. White people don't have to tiptoe because the standard is really built around who they are and how they think. But Black people have to tiptoe because even when they run into obvious conflict with that kind of thinking, if they so desire to remain in such a space and circle, then they gotta be quiet, they gotta hush, they gotta tiptoe. There's the gun line, boss, and all that other kind of stuff. And that is a false gospel. Christians who practice that are practicing a false gospel. No matter how much they talk about the gospel and have gospel conferences and all that other stuff, if it's Jesus and white supremacy and white norms and standardization of thinking and behavior, then it's just a false gospel. And that's exactly what racism is.
I don't know how to follow that. I wanted to add in my little 2 cents though.
Go ahead, brother.
But
I'm gonna follow
breaking
that
it down here, man.
Let me go ahead and try. Says Henry.
Yeah, I'll give it my best shot. Yeah, I'll give it my best shot. Well, I do want to make a couple points though. So first of all, when we think about what most philosophers call the problem of evil, sometimes it'll be referred to as the problem of suffering. It's one of the most basic philosophical objections that you're going to find to Christianity or to really theism in general. Now, within the African-American context, and really Africans in the diaspora period, you can't really deal with the problem of evil without eventually running into the intersection between the problem of evil and racism and oppression. I'm saying you can't properly deal with the problem of evil in this context without dealing with racism. Now, the reason why is because the sufferings and evils that people of African descent in the Western context have encountered, throughout our history here has been race related, right? From the time that we got here, till now, right? So from the first ship that brought us to George Floyd, right? We've constantly had to deal with the problem of evil in the form of racial oppression, injustice, and so forth. So here's the thing: if you're going to do apologetics in this context, then you've got to be able to give people a way of navigating the problem of evil. So we have to engage this issue on that ground. Secondly, when you're talking about the issue of value, okay, now think about when people say things like, where was Jesus during slavery? Or, that famous John Henry Clark quote where he's talking about Christianity was the handmaiden of white supremacy and so on and so forth, right? Now, here's the thing. We know that the oppression and slavery and so forth that we've experienced here in the Western world has been predicated on this notion that there's something less than about Black people, right? It militates against our personal value or our personhood. Okay, now here's the thing. If Christianity is rightly understood to be in league with that or to be tied to that, then it follows then that, well, it can't possibly be true. I mean, it's natural to think, well, wait a minute, how could Christianity be true if it's tied to this beating down of my personhood? So what we have to do then as apologists is demonstrate through argumentation, evidence, history, how there's this disconnect between white supremacy and the devaluing of African peoples that comes along with it, and Christianity proper. Now, Frederick Douglass understood this. Frederick Douglass made it very clear in his memoirs that the Christianity of Christ is vastly different than the Christianity of this land. He had that powerful insight, right? And so what we're trying to do is put forth evidence so that people in our context today can still see with that same clarity that Frederick Douglass did. Okay, now I'm going to sum up my next 2 points really quickly. But to be completely honest, now this is just my personal view. So I think that the urban apologetics community is in a sense like a triage, for people who are coming into the body of Christ. Because what's happening is you have, whether it be the Hebrew Israelite, the Moor, the Comedics, and so forth, they have legitimate anger and angst against white supremacy, racism, so on and so forth. And they come into the church, and I mean, in the broader sense, they come into the ecclesia, the church. And sometimes they come into local assemblies that aren't discipling people with respect to where do they put all this anger? What do they do with it? If I become a Christian, do I have to be a coon now? Do I, when I see George Floyd being choked out, do I have to just pray for him and leave that as it is? Or can I actually pursue justice? Can I do something about it? Right. And so I think that our job is to model that. That's why this symposium is so important, to give people a framework, not only with how to rightly think about these things, but then what to do, right? What would Jesus do, right? Jesus would say, no, you need to be a good Samaritan, pick that person who's been beat up on the side of the road and do something to change their condition, right? You need to be about their well-being. And lastly, this is part that might lose me a couple of subscribers. At the end of the day, we have to get to this issue of idolatry in the predominantly white church. Whether you like it or not, whether it feels good or not, I know that it stings, but it's there. The fact of the matter is, some of our white brothers and sisters in Christ have imbibed the wine of the world and are intoxicated with this notion of whiteness. Why do I say that? Because when you think about whiteness, is not like a fixed concept. When America was first founded, you had, English, you had French, you had Danish, you had all different types of people. And the concept of whiteness gradually forms and crystallizes over time. Irish people wasn't white until like the 1940s, when they were designated such, by the census. Now, am I saying that white people need to change their skin? There you go. I'm saying that white people need to be ashamed of their skin. Do they need to be ashamed of their, culture and, or whatever? That's not what I'm saying. Don't tune out yet. Just listen carefully. What I'm saying is, what we need to do is shave off the rust of racism away from a healthy understanding of who you are in Christ primarily, and then his sovereign will in which he made you how you are. You know what I'm saying? I had a guy come to me one day. He said he was mad because a black guy came to church wearing an African medallion. And he said, well, how would you feel if I came wearing a medallion, shaped like Germany? I'm like, fam, I don't care. More power to you. If you invite me over your house, hopefully we'll have some bratwurst and kick it. You know what I mean? Well, I'm a vegetarian now, but I mean, that's what I said at the time. Like, nobody cares about that, right? As long as you're not taking a feature of who you are and making it a foundation of who you are, rather than what Scripture has prescribed, in that we are made in the image of God. As long as you're not taking that foundation of the Imago Dei and replacing it with, that racial feature, I'm cool with you. You know what I'm saying? But once you begin to do that, once you begin to, take the Imago Dei and start putting other things over top of it and seeing life through that lens, now we're dealing with idolatry. And what I'm calling you back to what Scripture says.
Yeah.
This is what I had to go through in my own life. I'm saying, I'm not telling you something that I'm not doing myself, right? This is what we need to do. And so I think that the urban apologetics community, and this is my view, I'm not saying I speak for everybody on the panel, but I think it is our duty to contend against wrong understandings of identity within the church.
Amen.
And that has a lot to do with disentangling Christianity proper from Europeanism. And so that Christianity can stand on its own and be the transcendent force for godliness that it's supposed to be, that God intended it to be.
A type of ethnic triumphalism.
Right.
Amen.
In that sense, yeah.
Man, there was so much good stuff in there. I think I want to just add just an element to it, just because we addressed how there are cults that are arising, or people who are arising to address these issues from without the church, or even leaving the church to try to address it from the outside. I myself, when I first began to become self-aware in that sense, self-aware in the sense that I began to realize how much I was being influenced by white supremacy, right? I didn't learn that from the church. I didn't learn that from people sitting next to me. And so it served as kind of a lure to take me out of the church. And it kind of went hand in hand with becoming more self-aware and accepting who I was as a Black woman with leaving Christianity. Like, those two came in a package deal, right? And so now what we're finding is that is kind of exploding. And so people think that in order to be accepted as who they are, and to be vocal about their culture, or to appreciate their own heritage, they have to depart somehow from Christianity, because they don't understand how Christianity allows them to do that. And this all circles back again to this improper gospel, this inappropriate message, the perversion of Scripture that was used to serve white supremacist ideology, to keep Black people subjugated. A lot of times people say that Christianity is a tool of oppression. It's a tool of white supremacy. But what happened was, there was a web that was cast, right? A web that was cast, and that web is white supremacy, right? And it absorbed everything in its path and perverted everything, whether it be science, whether it be history, whether it be religion, Christianity in itself. All of these things perverted to serve this white supremacist ideology. And so now we're having to undo that. And I think another important thing is that, particularly with the Hebrew Israelites, and I don't mean to pick on them, but I kind of do mean to pick on them. They have this message, a lot of them, maybe not all of them, but have this message that somehow being an Afro descendant is not good enough. Being a Black person and being a Christian is not good enough. No, you need to distinguish yourself from the African who the white man has taught us. And I use the white man as a, he's an avatar. Not that all white people, even, I'm going to give that disclaimer right now. But who the so-called white man has told us and taught us was less than human, or at the bottom of the human ladder. And they've accepted that, and they're perpetuating it, while at the same time telling us to distinguish and separate ourselves from white supremacy. I think it's hypocrisy. It's absurd, to be honest with you. And then another thing is that, again, a lot of us don't realize, I was on a panel last night, and the brother, I want to say his name was Chris. I can't remember his last name. I'm sorry. Maybe Brother Isaiah, you can drop his name. But he used this term metacognition, and I didn't have the vocabulary for that. But what I really call it, what I usually say about that, is thinking about the way you think. So a lot of times people just don't reflect. We aren't self-aware. We just behave, but we don't pause to assess why we're behaving or why we're reacting to certain things the way we do. We don't assess why we're triggered in certain ways by seeing a Black man get shot, or if we feel like white supremacy doesn't exist, why we feel that way. Why do we feel that Black people are overreacting, or whatever the case may be? And so I think that white supremacy is so permeated throughout the culture that it is very hard for especially European Americans, but even some African Americans and other people in general, to recognize it in operation. Let me give you an example of white supremacy in operation. Right now, I'm happy to work for myself. I'm self-employed by the grace of God. But in times past, and even in certain conversations, I strain my vocal cords. I have to strain my vocal cords to appease the person I'm speaking to, because I come off as too strong and too black, and my voice is too deep as a Black woman. So I have to make sure that I talk like this so that you'll feel more comfortable and accept the message that I'm relaying to you. You understand what I'm saying? This is white supremacy. This is white supremacy. So for example, again, I'm taking another jab. For a Hebrew Israelite to tell me that my self-expression is a form of being ratchet, that's a problem. That's self-hatred. That's an expression of you having internalized the message of white supremacy, whether you recognize it or not. And so I think that, one, it's hard sometimes, as we want everybody, I'm talking about Black people, we want everybody to understand our plight. We expect everyone to understand and just see what racism is. But sometimes even we ourselves do not recognize the ideologies that we harbor that are self-harming and self-hating. And then to take it a step further, we have to be gracious with our non-Black brothers and sisters, because if we're having a hard time with our metacognition and our self-awareness, they will be having a hard time with the same issues as well, by and large. So just because it's something that we experience or we articulate doesn't mean that it's readily assessed or readily recognized by somebody who hasn't experienced it themselves. So I just appreciate everything that we've been discussing so far, everything that you brothers have been dropping, from the idea and the fact that white supremacy is not an individual, it's not a person, but it's a system, that it operates through groups, that individuals can harbor these ideologies. But one of the just jarring, I think, and most important things to take away as well is that Black people can be white supremacists and not even know it. That's extremely important. But yes, thank you guys for helping us to understand that. Go ahead,
brother.
Can
I say something just real quick? I just want to piggyback on the point that you made about Black people thinking that they have to leave Christianity to get closer to their Blackness and to better understand their Blackness. And I think this is one of the reasons why studying Black church history is so important, because we'll discover that Black people in the 17th century, 18th century, they were able to delineate between white supremacist Christianity and biblical Christianity. There's a Negro spiritual where the enslaved people actually used to sing, "Heaven, heaven, everybody who says they're going to heaven ain't going." When they sang that, they were actually talking about the slave master, because they knew that the slave master's brand of Christianity wasn't actually Christianity. And rather than rejecting Christianity proper, they stole away. They went underneath the poplars in these clandestine services, and they worshiped the true and living God according to their own culture. And so studying Black church history helps us to understand that we were perceptive enough and intelligent enough to know the difference between white supremacist Christianity and Christianity proper.
Yo, actually,
to that
real
point,
quick
I'm
on
sorry,
that.
I'm gonna let you jump back in, Adam. To that point, Brother Isaiah's book is coming out in August, Black Church Empowered. Make sure you check that out. His website is right there, bcempowered.org. But it is empowering to understand our history and settle into where we belong the appropriate way. Go ahead, Brother Adam.
Yeah, with a shameless plug, I actually got Dr. Vince Bantu coming on my channel, YouTube tomorrow. We'll be dealing with, ancient African Christianity. And I just had Isaiah Robinson talking about his book on last week, so I definitely want to kind of shameless plug that. You can check it out on my YouTube channel. With that being said, just to kind of add a piece to the point that he just made, though, about us not being so mentally impoverished, that we couldn't discern, the truth from falsehood. Understand that by the end of the Civil War, right, coming off of the plantation, if you will, maybe about, at most, you're dealing with like 5% of enslaved persons were literate, right? Now, the stats show that within one generation, within about 30 years, within one generation, the number of individuals, or the percentage rather, of individual African enslaved persons who were illiterate was at about 70%. So we went from 5% to 70% in about a generation. You know what I'm saying? So we're not dealing with people who were so mentally impoverished and just brainwashed and duped that they couldn't figure out truth from error. No, these people's mental capacities were just fine. Now, it's not to say that there wasn't any deception. Of course there was deception. And like I pointed out, Frederick Douglass was able to discern that. To Isaiah Robinson's point, there's actually another slave hymn, a Negro spiritual rather, where during the Civil War, there was a Negro spiritual where they actually talked about how God was with the North and was coming down south to set his people free. You know what I'm saying? So when we think about this idea that they were just somehow duped into white supremacy, no, you will never find a Negro spiritual where God is depicted as being pro-slavery, behind the slave masters or any of that. That's not what you see in the slave narratives and excuse me, the Negro spirituals coming out of that. Now here's why that's important, because if you understand that these African slave persons were coming out of oral cultures, right? Coming out of West Africa. You say, well, how do oral cultures pass along their values, ideals, and so forth? They do so through stories and songs. You say, among other things, and rituals and so forth. So these Negro spirituals are representative not just of the ideas of a few people that maybe were initially wrote them, but they're reflective of the cultural understanding of who God was. You know what I'm saying? God was not pro-slavery. And our ancestors and forefathers were able to understand that. And to your point, Nefertiti, this last thing I'll say about it, really, when the Comedics and Hebrew Israelites and all this, they were just brainwashing this Christianity and they didn't know any better. They're actually taking on a white supremacist understanding of our enslaved ancestors to make that claim, because they're saying that, we just didn't know no better. No, that's not false. Do your history. You know what I'm saying? Go back into the slave narrative yourself. I'm not making it up. You do the research. You know what I'm saying? And see how you've actually adopted a white supremacist perspective to even make that claim. And I think it's a shame. It's
a great tell that a paradigm is involved in white supremacy and self-hatred is their total rejection of West Africa. Nobody wants to be West Africa for some reason, right? I'm Kemet. I'm Israel. Yeah, we lived in Africa, but I'm from Israel. No one wants to be West African. That's problematic. For me, that's very problematic. What's wrong? You serve an entire half of the continent. Why? Why do you feel like you have to do it? Why you cannot tether yourself and your culture to that part of the continent? I'm saying.
I have a sermon I did where I discussed in depth as much as I could in 40 minutes on the theology of the spirituals, and it's actually called Message of the Spirituals. I'm gonna just drop the link in the live chat if you guys, anyone watching, if you're interested in that, go through some of the lyrics and look at some of the things. And I think it turned out good. But check that out if you're interested, where we discuss the theology of the spirituals, because that's a deep topic, and that Adam is exactly right about the theology being expressed in that way, and you can actually discern a lot from it, and it's really empowering to read and hear those lyrics. So there, I just dropped it in the live chat.
Amen.
Yeah.
Speaking of, go ahead, Adam. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Just real quick, in regard to what Alfredo was saying, the point about people not wanting to associate themselves with West Africa. See, the liberty of the biblical worldview is that my identity is grounded in Christ, and I understand that I'm the foundation of who I am is the Imago Dei. And given what we see in Genesis 1:26-27, also in Romans chapter 1-3, we understand that Imago Dei and reflections of that are present in all cultures. Now, obviously, man is depraved as well, so you're going to see fallenness in all cultures. But see, where I see exemplifications of the Imago Dei, I can highly esteem that. So when I think about my West African ancestors, I can look to the fact that it's not the case that there was all a bunch of raving polytheists or whatever. No, you can see reflections of godly morality. You can see reflections of, or even some of them were actually believed in like a most high and so on and so forth. And so this notion that Christianity is entirely like foreign and alien to anything that folks on West African in West Africa believe, that's a myth. That's totally false. I'm saying you can see snippets of truth which we should uphold. The notion of a collective identity, that has some bearing on our morality. That's very biblical. I'm saying, and we have to understand that. You know what I'm saying? So I don't have to eschew and get rid of the entirety of my West African heritage. Where they were in line with God's truth, I can esteem it. Where they weren't in line with God's truth, I can say, here's where the error, here's where the depravity of man is, and I'm going to exemplify the best of who God made me to be, sovereignly in his will. And so, this self-hatred and stuff that has no place in Christianity. It may have place in Hebrew Israelism or Comedicism or more Scientology, but not in Christianity.
Shawnee Miller just gave you a new nickname, Adam. It's Adam, just real quick, Coleman. I didn't type it; they did. Hey, I'm just.
And it's never real quick. It's that Baptist preacher in me, man. I got that.
Okay, so we were talking about Isaiah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Neff. Go ahead, Neff.
Okay, sure. So we were talking about the slave experience. We just spent a couple of minutes on the slave experience. So let's transition that into what we're experiencing right now, and this sort of rebellion that we're seeing in society, this outrage. Is there any validity, or is there any propriety from a biblical standpoint? Is it okay for a Christian to experience these emotions, to feel outraged at what's happening in society, or to feel sad or depressed by it? How do we assess these emotions? How do we become, how do we employ that metacognition? But also, is there any validation to it, biblically speaking?
I won't give a long answer. Let me read one verse. Romans chapter 12, verse 15. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. I'm gonna let everyone else answer, but your answer, you got to understand the category of biblical lament. Not that I've mastered its theology or anything, but it's so important. And the Bible is an emotional book. Lamentations. I mean, and so I just want to preface that, because there's lots of other verses I could share, but that one's, I just love the sort of shortness of it. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. Boom.
Hey, real quick. I mean, I can be quick with my answer too. I would encourage people to I just did it again.
I thought you were kidding for a second.
I was Oh man, that's wild. That's wild. So I would encourage people. I just had a dialogue with my man Tim Stratton over on Free Thinking Ministries, and one of the things I said over there, I was addressing this issue here, like about anger, and is there a place to be rightfully angry, so forth. So I gave this analogy: if somebody breaks into my house and harms my daughter, right? It's a wrap for them. I'm saying, like, I'm going to do everything in my power, I'm saying, to rise up and deal with that person violently. I'm saying? It's going to be a problem. I'm saying? I'm going to be angry at somebody trying to, or, harming my daughter. Right. I'm saying? Now, it's the same way, to use a biblical example, when you think about how God's people cried out to him, and after 400 years, he went to Egypt and God wrecked shop. He was not playing. I'm saying? And 10 plagues was no joke. Now, where am I going with this? There is a correlation between love and anger, right? Sometimes expressing anger is in and of itself an expression of love, right. Okay? So when we're dealing with righteous indignation about somebody being choked to death in broad daylight and not arrested till like 3 or 4 days later, I'm saying, when we're angry about that, it's not that we're angry for anger's sake. You know what I'm saying? It's because we're dealing with somebody who is made in the image of God, whose life was snuffed out unjustifiably. And the love that I have within me compels me to be angry. You know what I'm saying? Now, the reverse of that is this. If you have a situation where love ought to be compelling you towards righteous anger, towards righteous indignation, but you don't sense that you don't have that, then I would argue that it's an indicator that there's something deficient about your love walk. You know what I'm saying? If you're not angry at the right time, then that means that there's something going on over here with your love walk that's deficient. And you have to then ask yourself, this notion of orthopathy, right? You're having right feelings towards folks. That's right. Why am I not mad about somebody's life being snuffed out unjustifiably? Mm-hmm. I would suggest to you that it could be because your love walk has been contaminated by something from the world, i.e., white supremacy, racism. It could be a number of things, quite frankly, some form of idolatry. I'm not even going to spell it out for you because I want you to check your heart on it. You know what I'm saying? But the bottom line is there's something deficient with your love walk if at the times when you're supposed to be angry, you find yourself not being so. I think it's a strong indicator there's something wrong there.
The Reformation.
Can I step in real quick? We unfortunately are all victims of American Christianity light that says that if you're not Joel Osteen happy all the time, then your Christianity is defective. We're unfortunately all victims of this 20th and 21st century notion of Christianity. The reality is there's a prophet in the Bible, Jeremiah, who's known as the weeping prophet. We have a Messiah who got so angry that he turned tables over in the temple. And I just want to read something. I want to read something real quick. Let's not forget about the witness of Job, right? This is Job chapter 7, starting in verse 2. It says, like a slave who longs for the shadow And like a hired hand who looks for his wages, so I am allotted months of emptiness, and nights of misery are apportioned to me. When I lie down, I say, when shall I arise? But the night is long, and I am full of tossing till the dawn. Now, this same man, Job, who says that he was apportioned misery, ultimately makes the hall of faith in the book of Hebrews. So if anybody tells you that somehow your Christianity is defective because you're angry or because you're experiencing deep emotions, they just have a skewed notion of Christianity and an unbiblical understanding of human emotion.
I'd like to say this. So I want to really bring this to a real particular point. So while we are talking, to say, I guess about 45 minutes ago, the president declared that he was going to evoke an 1807 law to bring the military into U.S. cities. So folks, all the conspiracy theorists kind of folks that have been talking about martial law, well, that's exactly what your president is talking about. But hear what I'm saying. Hear this point, and I want to show you how relevant it is to what we're talking about. What the president is saying is that they're going to be shooting on sight, looters and, rioters, so forth and so on. Now, I want you to imagine in your mind why they're doing this. It is not so much because loss of life is being threatened as much as loss of property. So if a person is stealing a mannequin out of a store, that person can be shot and killed. So watch this now. Watch what I do with this. Watch this now. This is what they consider to be a just response and a just reaction to looting, right? Which means stealing during a riot. Pay attention to what I'm doing now. This is what many believe to be a just response to looting, shooting people who loot. I find it ironic that many of the same people who are very, very quiet when it comes down to racial injustices like murdering police officers, an unarmed man, particularly a black man, they have like absolutely nothing to say about that until outrage and anger becomes so flared that it turns into violent protest and looting, so forth and so on. Now, let me just say this. This is what I put up on my post a little earlier. Catch what I do. What is it about looting that makes those so silent on racial injustice become so vocal and outraged by it? Is it that you detest the very notion of someone unlawfully taking something that belongs to another from them? And then I say, it'll hit you in a minute. So for a lot of people, they were reading that and not getting it. And so watch this now. People who have nothing to say about a person whose life was taken from them. That is the ultimate form of stealing. Stealing somebody's life unjustly. They have nothing to say about that, but they have everything to say about people unlawfully taking possessions. So as Adam was articulating, your whole way of thinking, your love is wrong, because if you can actually have angst in your heart towards looters who steal possessions and not feel any kind of remorse or empathy about somebody who's stolen the life of another, then your whole thinking is just sordid. Your way, your perspective, your worldview, your beliefs, your ideologies, your way of thinking about the Bible is just so jacked up that you need to be saved. I mean, I just don't even know what even to say about you. You need some help because there's a one-to-one correlation here that you're not getting. And you tell me Is the life of a Black man more valuable than the life of Cartier or Nike or Louis Vuitton or Gucci? Now, I want to tell you that in reality, while people reacted to the phrase Black Lives Matter, maybe we shouldn't say Black Lives Matter. Maybe we should just say all lives don't matter. Maybe you'll like it better if we put it that way, because that's also a truth statement. All lives don't matter. In reality, they do in the context of the Imago Dei, but in the context of the US, all lives really don't matter, because in reality, Black life can be snatched in an instant by a police officer who deems Black people a threat on sight just for being Black. You don't need a knife, you don't need a gun, you don't even need to say nothing. You just need to be Black and you are dangerous. Your Blackness is a weapon that makes you armed and dangerous and worthy even of death. And that's why we always got to be trying to justify. That's why there's always got to be folks who would say, well, what did he do? What's in his background? You know, did he ever smoke weed before? Did he ever get suspended from junior high? Whatever, it doesn't matter. In context there, what happens is that it doesn't matter what a Black person is doing, sitting in the car, standing in front of a store, the bodega, whatever it is that they're doing. They could be sitting in their own house, Breonna Taylor. Doesn't matter what we're doing. The reality is that Black life will be snatched so quickly. Watch this now. Watch this. Don't miss this. But there is an intentional effort to preserve white life. And that is why white people could have an M16. They could have a bazooka strapped to the back of their back and walk up to a police officer yelling and cussing, spitting in his face. And the police officer will stand there with the most control and discipline, not doing anything at all. But a Black man could have stole a lollipop and ran from the scene, and the officer will shoot him in the back because there is no desire to protect that Black life. Black people need to die for jaywalking, for spitting on the ground, for not answering to a traffic ticket, any little summit. Black people deserve death. White people deserve preservation of life. And that's why there'll be this hesitancy. Why else do you think that white people can go into a church and murder 15 Black people and then they stop off at Wendy's or Burger King? You hungry?
Hey,
you hungry, man?
Come on, bro.
Feel like eating? You know, and Black people, guilty or not, we can't even hardly get arrested. I mean, please explain to me why, if Gregory Floyd was so guilty, why didn't they just arrest him and put him in the car? Why did they need to have him on the ground for so long? Why did they need to do that? If he was guilty, arrest him, read him his rights, put him in the car, take him to jail. But no. This man put his hands in his pocket and casually put all of his body weight on him. Like, I don't really care that he can't breathe. I really don't care that he never makes it back to his family. You know why? Because all lives don't matter. So don't come telling me about blue lives and other lives. What we are saying is, and until our life matters as well, then all lives don't matter. That's what the conversation is about. Our lives need to matter as well. And that is why we need to be outraged. In fact, not just we, as in Black people, but we, as in everybody who calls themselves an American, because we all need to realize that this that is happening to us is an injustice that is happening to another one of God's creatures, another human being. And if you can sit by and watch that happen to another human being, how dwells the love of God in you? Romans 15:1 says that we ought to all bear, what it says, now we who are strong have an obligation to bear the weaknesses of those who are without strength. And so it is a moral, watch this now, an ethical and a moral obligation that the strong carry vicariously the inabilities and the weaknesses of those who are unable to advocate for themselves. And so justice is a moral issue. Everybody who is able needs to stand up for what is right, whether it affects your ethnic or cultural group or not. Everybody has a moral responsibility to see to it that everyone is treated justly. If you fail to do that, then you fail as a child of God. You fail to honor Christ, because here's what Jesus is saying to you. Because you don't think that we're being biblical. So we've been reading scriptures all night. Let me give you a little bit more if you haven't been convinced by those. Jesus said, when I was in prison, you visited me. And when I was hungry, you fed me. And when I was clothed, when I was naked, you clothed me. And they said, when did we see you like this, Jesus? He didn't say that I ontologically was in those conditions. He said, but when you have seen the least of these in those conditions, when you have done that to them, it is as though you have done it to me. So here's what I want to say to all of you so-called folks that love to evoke social justice warrior and Marxism and this, that, and the other. When you mistreat people that look like me, you are mistreating Jesus. And if your pastor ain't telling you that, you at the wrong church. Mark it down. You're at the wrong church. When you mistreat people with my skin color, lighter, darker, in between, cocoa, brown, black as can't see in the morning, the can't see at night. When you mistreat people that look like me, you are mistreating Jesus according to his words. So when we are hungry and you don't feed us, then you're mistreating Jesus. When we are unarmed and we're being shot down in the street and you look the other way in indifference, you are being indifferent towards Jesus. Now that's some gospel for you if you need to know what the gospel is.
Yeah, and that relates.
I'm sorry that I get passionate like that.
Don't apologize.
Don't apologize.
They like
We ain't
it.
taking no
It's the
apology.
scriptures, dog.
We ain't taking
We
no
gotta
Almost
apology.
brought me to tears, Doc. Almost brought me to tears.
Man, it's riveting,
Almost brought me
man.
to
It's
tears.
riveting, man. It's the
Jesus.
scriptures, man. And let me say this too, just to tack on a little bit. So here's the thing. Now I know people's gonna get mad at me. You know what I'm saying, but you ain't arguing with me. You're arguing with the scriptures and you're arguing with history. Here in America, anytime you see moral progress with respect to race, a key component in bringing that about has always been the strategy of mobilizing the indifferent, moderate, white Christian. Facts. Look it up. You want to deal with the abolition of slavery? Talk to me about Harriet Beecher Stowe writing Uncle Tom's Cabin to mobilize the moderate, on the fence white Christian. You want to talk about the civil rights movement? Talk to me about how Martin Luther King was explicit in terms of his nonviolent protests being aired on TV as a mechanism to provoke the heartstrings of those who were watching and were confused somehow about the realities of police brutality and racism. He did that to mobilize the moderate white Christians. Read that letter from Birmingham jail.
Yeah.
This is what we're dealing with. It has always been an integral part of bringing about racial change in America. And I would suggest to you that today, I hate to even say this is going to sound counterproductive, but I really believe, seriously, I think the Black voice is not enough. Historically, it hasn't been, right? The reality is we need our white brothers and sisters in Christ to disentangle their identity from whatever they need to. We all have to do it, yo. We all do. You know what I'm saying? Everybody does. What I want you to do is ground your identity in Christ. And from that vantage point, pursue justice. And in doing so, understand that there are minorities, not just Black people, there are minorities that need you to raise your voice and speak out against racism. Listen. I'm not at y'all cookout for real. I'm in my cookout. So I don't have Uncle so-and-so, I'm trying to censor myself, using the N-word and, talking negative about, Black people and so forth. I'm not in that circle. Mm-hmm. But if you're at your cookout, you know what I'm saying, and you've got, your uncle so-and-so or, your cousin so-and-so who's a judge in such and such a place talking about this, that, and the third, it's your responsibility as a Christian to be a Christian in that setting. You know what I'm saying? And to speak and speak up truth. I'm letting you know, at my cookout, I'm letting everybody know. I'm saying what the gospel truth is. If we're having a discussion, I'm keeping it real with everybody.
Now you're
all
a vegetarian, Adam, and you gonna go to that cookout still?
We grilled
But I
corn.
think-
What you talking about?
You're gonna enjoy that?
You said what?
But listen. I
As
think
a-
we're at the crux of an issue here, and I think that we have to realize that a lot of opponents of quote unquote social justice, their biggest problem is that they're filtering their theology through their political ideology.
Right.
Okay, their republicanism is more important to them than the Bible, essentially. And they actually want the strongest government in the world to do less for Black people, to do less for those that are marginalized, to retract and shrink. And that is a political ideology that has to be confronted, because as long as they are bowing at the altar of republicanism, they will never concede. They will fight tooth and nail to justify their skewed perception of the gospel, because they're filtering the gospel of Jesus Christ through their political ideology. And if what we're saying challenges their notion of what politics ought to be or what this government ought to be, they will push back every time.
Can I say something right there too?
Hold on. I just want to let everybody know we've been on for about 2 hours, so I don't want to belabor. I can stay here, but I just want to let everybody know that we might be coming down to, winding it down. Go ahead.
Now, I just want to make something clear, because, when people hear Isaiah Robertson say what he just said, then would they say, "Oh, you're saying I need to be a Democrat?" Well, wait a minute, but therefore,
Exactly.
Therefore, homosexuality.
Exactly.
No. Slow down. So I know that's a knee-jerk reaction. Slow down, because people do me the same way. Here's what we're trying to say. Understand something. The conservative side of the house, politically, the conservative side end of the spectrum is not the political extension of the church. You know what I'm saying? It's not the political extension of Christianity, right? And so by definition, the proper definition of a conservative is somebody who's interested in conserving the ideals and principles that this nation was built on. That's what you're talking about when you're dealing with a conservative. Now, people make the assumption that those ideals and principles are explicitly Christian, right? However, the problem is, hey, don't get mad at me. Study the history. The reality is that in addition to some ideals that flow from scriptures, you also have ideals flowing from the Enlightenment period, from the European Enlightenment period, like a particular understanding of individualism, like what it means to have mastery over one's things and all that kind of, I can get into it. That gets into property law and so forth. The bottom line is that you have cobbled together some ideals from the biblical worldview, some ideals from secular, the secular Enlightenment period. And so those are kind of things wrapped in there as well. So what you're trying to conserve is not purely Christian. What I'm suggesting to you is that for what Christians need to do is, regardless of whoever over here is conservative, whoever's liberal, our position ought to be transcended. We're coming from a position of those who represent the kingdom of God, right? And we're interacting, we're getting our hands dirty, we're getting in the world and being interactive. I'm not saying that we're separatists in that sense, but we just have to understand where we stand. It's just like St. Augustine talked about in the city of God. There's the city of man and there's the city of God. It's not to say that there aren't interactions between the two. We just have to be clear about where we stand and not have our identity tied to and tied down, I'm saying, by these political ideologies that ultimately do not flow entirely from scripture. We need to put scripture first. And so I just want to throw that out there. Cats hit me up all the time, man, on my Facebook. Now, oh, you trying to say I'm a Democrat? You need to be a Democrat? No. Hear the biblical critique and take it for what it is. Don't take it a step further than that. Just listen to what we're trying to say and go from there.
I got a Bible verse for that real quick.
Oh.
Acts 17. It's just a verse I'm gonna share. Because what we're trying to talk about now is sort of trans-political and different things like that. And I love this verse from Acts 17. The perception of some of the rabble rousers who wanted to come against the early Christians. Listen to this. It's so beautiful. especially if you kind of know about the Greco-Roman world, meaning as I read this, you'll see it's a world that needed to be turned upside down. Look at Acts chapter 17 here and what it says, starting in verse 6. And when they could not find them, they dragged Jason and some of the brothers before the city authorities, shouting, "These men who have turned the world upside down have come here also, and Jason has received them, and they are all acting against the decrees of Caesar, saying that there is another king, Jesus." See, that's good. So, they're trying to cause trouble for him. And certainly these Christians aren't going around acting against decrees of Caesar. In fact, early Christian apologists would write letters, Justin Martyr and guys like that would write letters to the emperor, like, look, we don't steal stuff. We're not causing trouble. We're not going to bow down to your false gods, but just let us be and we'll be your best citizens ever. This is the kind of stuff they had. And the Romans basically were convinced, unless you hail the genius Caesar, we're you suspect. But that is so beautiful, saying there is another king, Jesus. And
Amen.
The people in the city authorities were disturbed when they heard those things. And so, that's us. We're talking about real life things here on earth, right? We understand that, but it's because we have an allegiance to a higher order, a higher kingdom that by God's grace is making its footprint, impression felt larger and larger on the earth. And that's what it's supposed to be as we one day look forward to Revelation 5, Revelation 7. But let the church act and think like that more and more now, and I pray that happens. So good panel, good stuff. I just wanted to share that verse.
People, can I? Yeah, thanks. So I was trying to jump in for a minute. Adam kept blocking me. It's okay though. People really believe that Christianity doesn't have the ability to desire or seek justice. And the reason for that is that many people conflate justice with vengeance. Right? In their minds, they think that's what justice is. And therefore, since we're not going to eke out vengeance, therefore, we don't care about justice. And they'll actually use scripture, right, against us to say that, when Jesus talks about eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, but I say, do not resist an evil man. It's like, you see, Jesus doesn't let you get busy, but when he says resist, right, in the Greek, it's actually saying, do not forcibly declare one's personal conviction. That's what he's saying in that scripture, because in Torah, this eye for an eye thing, that's done in a court, right? Justice is a communal enterprise, right? So Jesus is not saying in that scripture, don't get justice. What he's saying is, don't be Batman. Right. That's what he's saying. Get justice, because he's course correcting the Torah to these Pharisees that should have known better, right? But then you could say, well, the courts are corrupt, so we have no chance, as if the courts weren't corrupt in the first century. And Jesus speaks on that. He talks about the parable of the persistent widow, speaking to a judge who claims that he's godless. I am godless. I don't care about man or God. So this is a godless court, and she's constantly going at this dude. Give me justice. Give me justice. And she wears him out. Why would Jesus use that as a parable if that was inappropriate to do? So as a Christian, get justice, but don't be Batman.
That's okay, good, so
besides Batman got
an
unkosher symbol for his animal,
which is going to be kind of our last question before we open the floor for just 2 or 3 questions from the audience. I don't want to keep the brothers all night, but listen, we've talked for years. Okay, we've been talking for years. We've been diagnosing the issue for years. You stop any random Joe. I don't care if he's a doctor or a street pharmacist, drug dealer. They can all tell you what the issues are as it relates to oppression and social injustice in America, right? We've diagnosed that. Some of us have even talked about what things we ought to do. But we've spent a good portion of the evening defending, even just the last few comments, defending the right to even feel indignant about it, defending the right to feel like we deserve some sort of justice. So now the question comes to a matter of practicality. How can we actually, what should we actually be doing? Like when we had the discussion about being upset and the validation of those feelings, there were people in the comments saying, well, you shouldn't feel so indignant that you burn down hospitals or you burn down banks or you ruin somebody's personal business who they saved up and put money into this establishment, and then somebody comes and burns it down. And I understand that sentiment, but then you can't, it's kind of like raising a child. You don't tell a child, no, don't do this, without telling the child what to do instead. So if you're not going to offer me a solution, a practical solution, then don't try to control the way I'm reacting, because you're not telling me how to react. So I'm going to open the floor to you, brothers, to give us some good guidance on, some good godly guidance on how can we practically, I don't want to hear apple pie in the sky, maybe someday kumbaya. Right now, the country is on fire. Right now, the government is probably, as according to Pastor Richardson, instituting martial law. We don't know what it's going to look like. We just went through the Rona, been on quarantine, lockdown for who knows how long, and now we have this situation arising. So please give the people some practical, godly guidelines, not even guidelines, but even some guidelines, but also actionable steps, things they can do to correct this issue right now in 2020.
Can I start?
Oh.
Isaiah had jumped in first. His lit up first.
Yeah. So my response is going to be two-pronged here, and I want to speak really from the perspective of the African-American church. Number one, I want to talk to pastors, okay? And I hope pastors have learned from the pandemic and from the subsequent injustices that we're seeing with Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd. I hope that we have learned that during watch night, all right, we need to ground our people, all right, in something that is substantive. We don't need to, during watch night on December the 31st, we don't need to promise pie in the sky. We don't need to promise abundance and blessings, no problems in the year to come, because 2020 could be right around the corner, okay? So to my pastors, we need to utilize not just our watch night services, but our Sunday services to ground our congregations in deep, substantive theological reflection and doggone it, a good doctrine of suffering. So that's number one. Number two, the Black church has historically told Black people to do three things. Number one, look inward. Number two, look outward. Number three, look upward. Look inward, own our feelings. We are angry right now. It's okay to be angry. All right. It's okay to realize that you are experiencing tumultuous emotions. That's okay. Own that. There's nothing wrong with that. Look inward and realize that sometimes you learn more about God by learning more about yourself. Okay. Number two, look outward. And this is social engagement. This is being on the front lines, right? Being out there with a bullhorn, being on the picket lines, being out there, public, signing petitions, sending emails, calling, realizing that you are a part of a community, and what you are doing proactively isn't just impacting you, but it's also impacting your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, and the entire community that you are within. So look outward. But number three, look upward. All right. Realize God is our vindicator. And ultimately, as we place our faith and trust in him, we know that we will receive justice. All right. Justice will come. It may not be on this side, right? But in the age to come, things will be rectified. All injustices will be met by the wrath and the justice of God. So maintain a strong and passionate faith in the living God, because at the end of the day, he is our vindicator. Our justice will be won, and we can trust in that. So look inward, look outward, look upward, and pastors, ground your people in substantive, thoughtful theology that will get them through times like this.
Hey man, that's powerful, man. If anybody went to one of them churches that had to, 2020, your vision's gonna come to pass, or you're gonna have a bunch of money or something like that, they lied to you, dog. You get about that check, that's on point. Y'all know how they do. But anyway, just to piggyback on that. I mean, first of all, we understand that God, the Bible says he is light. You know what I'm saying? It talks about he is light. He is the very foundation of what it means to be good. I mean, that's what that verse is referring to: goodness, purity, so forth. God is the essence of what it means to be good. So when you think about any sort of community development, in terms of a moral framework, you can't really find. You're not going to find a better moral framework than the one that the biblical worldview can give, because our foundation is God, right? So that in terms of the development of families and whatever else that we need to, pile on to that, you know what I'm saying, if we're not building on that solid foundation, you know what I'm saying, then we're already going to be off kilter. Now, with that being said, I think one of the mistakes that we've made as a community is that we've misunderstood or misinterpreted the civil rights movement. Okay. I said the other night, man, we've been running victory laps from the civil rights movement for like 50, 60 years now. You know what I'm saying? We've been running victory laps, because we misunderstood it, right? The civil rights movement, you're dealing with individuals, or a group of people rather, who are saying, look, we have been cut off from our rightful place and access, economically and politically. We'll just put it that way, right? And so they attain that economic and political access, right? Now, but at the same time, I just said the other night, it's like if I give you a car, give you some car keys and you don't know how to drive, then it's not going to do you any good. You're either going to wreck yourself or you're not going to go anywhere, right? Because you don't know what to do with it. So we've got this, we attain this economic access and this political access, and what should have followed that, had it not been for, our leaders like Malcolm, Medgar, Martin being snuffed out, we should have followed that, would have been an economic and political movement. That's what should have followed that, right? So that because the thing is, listen, if you got 30, 40 years of redlining where banks are divesting from African-American areas and people can't gain equity in their homes, just because those laws are done away with, that doesn't mean that the effects of those laws from when they were in place are still, present and rippling throughout, our economic, situation. I'm saying, so there are reverberating effects from times past, in the same way that if I, grab your arm and leave a bruise, I can let my hand go, but you're still going to have the bruise. We're still dealing with the economic bruises of slavery and Jim Crow, right? So what happens is, just to make it real short, if you're dealing with areas that are economically distressed, then you're probably going to have more crime. If you got more crime, that means you're going to have a higher police presence. If you have a higher police presence, that means you're going to have more interactions with the police that can end up in a negative way, such as what you saw with George Floyd, right? So what we need to do is we need to equip ourselves, as we build our community, we need to equip ourselves economically. We need to be teaching financial literacy to our kids. We need to be teaching, how do you maintain good credit? I know that doesn't sound spiritual, but guess what? Being a good steward over the things that God blesses you with is very spiritual. You see what I'm saying? It's being that's discipline is a fruit of the spirit, right? You know what I'm saying? Self-control, right? So economically, there's that. Now, in addition to that, not only do we need economic development, but when it comes to politically, how many of us are aware of who our police chief is, or the sheriff? When's the last time you went to a city council meeting? When's the last, who is your congressman or your Senate representative? Are you engaging those folks? See, the problem is this, if you're getting involved in these high profile cases and you're mad about all that kind of stuff, yeah, we should be mad about it. But the thing is, we need to be proactive and not reactive. What are some steps that we can take so that there's not another George Floyd? What do we need to do? So just to make it even more explicit, what did the folks in Georgia need to do where Arbery was murdered? What do they need to do to advocate for a stricter understanding of what constitutes a citizen's arrest, such that there's not this wiggle room, this legal wiggle room, so that two murderers can go out and chase a guy down in their truck and then gun him down in the middle of the street? What do they need to do from a policy standpoint to bring about that sort of legal change? You know what I'm saying? They need to be active in that. So I said that to say, again, we don't have to be docile. I'm saying, but not being docile doesn't mean just burning stuff up. What it means is you can't wait every 4 years to cast a vote and think it's going to be all right. It's not going to be all right. It hasn't been all right. So we got to do something different, right? We need to be engaging the systems and structures that we have in place, and we need to be advocating for people to be in positions of power that reflect our values, right? And ultimately the biblical values. Shout out to my man Don Carey, who just got elected to city council last week. He's a Christian. You know what I'm saying? That's ministry, right? That's being a steward. That's getting involved. I know he's going to enact justice. I know what he's going to be about. We need more of that. I'm not gonna belabor the point, but let's get active, y'all.
Amen.
You
I've heard
changed
so
the
many times
terminology, Adam.
Christians.
You say what?
You changed the terminology from "I'm going to be quick" to "I'm not going to belabor the point."
Hey, but he
Same
cut it
thing,
off
Doc,
there
same
though. He
thing.
stopped there.
I
So
switched it up. I switched it up for you. I switched it up.
I've heard from Christians that we ought not to seek political office because the land belongs to the enemy and this, that, and the third. Listen, what if Joseph had said that to Pharaoh? No, thank you. I don't want to be third in Egypt. I don't want to take that responsibility upon myself. What if Daniel had said that in Babylon? What if Esther had said, I don't want to be the queen in here because that's, Babylon, Artaxerxes, he's wicked and he doesn't serve the God that I serve and I'm going to stay away. We have to be able to put ourselves or allow God to use us to be placed in these positions to exert influence. We are the light of the earth. We are the salt of the earth. We are supposed to be effecting change. People should see a difference when we enter a space. We should be, to use the terminology, popular terminology, we should be changing the atmosphere when we come into a room. But I mean that very literally. We should be bringing the Holy Spirit with us. I want to ask BK, Vocab, Damon, also, do you guys have any tips on how to combat white supremacy or injustice today in 2020 and beyond? Like Adam said, and beyond.
There's a saying that people use. And depending on who's saying the saying could mean very different things. And that saying is just preach the gospel, right? Now, when some people say that, what they're actually saying is shut up, Black Christian, go to church and pray. That's what they mean when they say that, right? That's not how I'm using this term. I'm talking about the Great Commission, right? I'm talking about that we have to make disciples of all nations. Right? Disciples of Christ are made. You're not born into this. You have to be made. And even once you receive the gospel and you're saved, great. That's the beginning. Because he also says, and teach them to obey. Right? So it's a process. There's a maturing into being Christ. I mean, that's the overarching theme of Paul's epistles, his wantingness for his believers, for the body to grow in their salvation, right? And why is that important? Because, like Damon said earlier, right, the theology is important, but how do you walk that out in real time, right? Is somebody teaching you to be a godly spouse? If you're a college student, what does that mean to be a Christian in college? What does it mean to be a professional athlete and be a servant of the Most High? What does that look like in real time? And why is that important? Because if you instill and you teach and you disciple people and have the understanding of the gospel, they're going to see things the way Christ sees it. So when this white cop sees an unarmed Black man and he's been handcuffed and subdued, he's going to see him as the imager of God and not take his life away because someone took the time to teach that officer to obey. Are we making disciples? Are you getting in there with people? Are you having these relationships to help them change? Right? You have to, they're being made disciples. And I feel like we don't really take discipleship serious, right? We need people to help us to be what we was intended to be, which is, again, being the Imago Dei. So discipleship is definitely needed.
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. One, people need to be aware of what happens locally, right? One of the worst things you can do is really sit out of local elections in terms of what happens in your county, your city politics, and even your state politics, because a lot of what ends up happening in terms of the change we want to see is really affected first at that level, right? So let me give you an example of that. White women in America have for centuries yelled trouble and rape and threat, and it has caused all kinds of riots and the loss of black life. And we see that happening all the time. I mean, we've got, again, Elevator Amy and all. We see this happen. Amy Cooper from Central Park, and this the fella in Minneapolis, Tom. We see these kinds of things happening all the time, right? Where white people will weaponize the police against black people. So here's what you need to do. Stop allowing politicians to come up into your church speaking and all kinds of other stuff and coming to your civic organizations and, you know, and doing all of this vote for me stuff empty-handed. We have to know what we need, right? So here's what black people need, just in case you don't know. There needs to be legislation in every state that makes weaponizing the police against black people a felony, right? You need to tell anybody that's running for attorney general, judge, whatever, you need to make sure that they have that on their agenda, right? Don't come up in the church trying to sweet talk us, getting on our radio programs and television programs, trying to get our vote. I don't care. I'm not on no Democratic plantation or Republican one. You know, you keep your hot sauce and your chicken and your shucking and jiving at home. We are not entertained by that nonsense. If you don't have an agenda that specifically impacts black life in America, then we ain't voting for you. And we need to be serious about that. There needs to be legislation that makes that a felony so that people are not just getting fired, they're getting a felony record behind that nonsense. And then they're going to realize, though, I don't want that, because that means I ain't going to be able to find another job if I try to weaponize the police against black people. That's one thing that we can do. We need to push for that. Everybody needs to demand that those that are running for offices that can affect that kind of legislation in their state, that kind of thing happens. We also need to push legislation that makes police brutality a felony. For instance, the police officer that killed Terrence Crutcher, she's a sheriff's deputy in another nearby county in Oklahoma. She just got fired. They gave her a lesser sentence of I believe it was first-degree manslaughter, and then they threw it out, which means essentially that she has no record and then she gets to work in law enforcement, right? And so what police officers need to know is you're not just going to lose your job, and you're not just going to be able to go one state over or one county over and find another job in law enforcement. You too are going to get jail time. And we're not talking about just for killing black people. We're talking about for abuse of authority. We're talking about for racially profiling, injuring, and harming black people, right? We need legislation that makes that a crime. It does not always need to come down to a black person getting shot before we are rioting, because a whole lot of the times it's not just black people getting shot. It's that cousin or that brother or that son or that father of yours that gets drugs planted on them. And because he doesn't have the means and the wherewithal to get proper legal representation, he's got to get the plea deal, even though he knows that he done nothing wrong, and be gone from his family for 10 years. That is as bad as being killed in the street. That our black men are spending ridiculously long sentences, even on things that police officers and judges have conspired to keep black people behind bars. We've got too many receipts and documentation for this kind of thing. And they're not just doing it to adults, they're even doing it to black juveniles. I mean, the New Jersey judge was just sentenced for literally taking kickbacks for giving sentences to black teenagers. And so for people to have the audacity to say that systemic racism in the justice system doesn't exist, these people clearly are they're asleep somewhere, you know, for God's sake. But we need laws that make these things crimes. That's what we need. That's the black agenda. We need to make those two things crimes, because those two things every single day are impacting black life everywhere. It's just way too easy for that to happen. And so we have to really start making sure that we're not just voting, but that we've got an agenda, and that we're making sure that these politicians are running on our agenda, or they're not going to get our vote. Get off that Democratic plantation. Just because a person thinks that because they're a Democrat, they're supposed to vote for you. That's what Joe Biden was essentially saying. He was kind of joking around about it, but he wasn't really joking. He actually has the audacity to think that because I'm Trump's alternative, I mean, if you're going to really be black, then vote for me. Well, Negro, please. We don't have to vote for you. What are you bringing to the table? I don't care that you was Obama's vice president. We don't need to vote for you just because you're a Democrat. What you going to do for us? You know, to talk to us about elevator Amy's and what you going to do to make sure that that's a felony and that Amy's go to jail for doing stuff like that. Amy's not only get fired, but Amy spend several years behind bars for trying to weaponize the police against black people. If you ain't talking about that, then you're not getting our vote. And those are the kind of things that we need to do, real actionable items that hold politicians accountable when they want to run up in our church trying to sing and trying to preach and trying to act like they know rap lyrics, quoting Tupac and all that other stuff. That don't make you black. You know what I mean? If you love black people, then put an agenda together and go before Congress and make something happen for us, and stop trying to placate and all that other nonsense, thinking that we so foolish that, you know, as long as you can do some cultural appropriation, we gonna laugh. Boy, you heard he was quoting Biggie. You know, I don't care how many rap lyrics you know. Put together something that that's going to actually help us, and not get in office and then look the other way when when our issues come up. And I'll just say this lastly. I think Eric Mason said something in his woke church. I'll just read it quickly. He pointed out 3 things that we can do. One, he talked about being aware and understanding that the issue of justice is not just a black issue, it's a kingdom issue. And that we've got to learn how the history of racism in America and in the church has tainted our witness to a watching world. Second, he said we need to be redemptive. That is to grieve and to lament what we have lost and to regain our prophetic voice. That's the thing. The church isn't, listen, Moses was in Pharaoh's court not to re-elect him, but to be a prophetic voice against him, right? And so the church needs to reclaim that. Time out for Christians for Trump and all that other stuff. The church is supposed to be a prophetic voice, not eating at Pharaoh's table. And if you don't understand that, then you don't understand your ecclesiastical role in society. So we need to be redemptive, to be a prophetic voice, calling the church to remember our gospel imperative to promote justice and mercy. And lastly, be active, to move beyond polite, safe conversations about reconciliation and to begin to set things aright for our soon coming king. That means that we got to start telling the truth regardless of who's offended. And we've got to start setting the record straight so that in view of the eschatological moment of Jesus's return, we are living in light of that. I'm done.
Hey, can I ask just a quick question? And I'm throwing this out to the brothers on the panel who have pastoral experience. Something that Alfredo said that really struck me about the role of discipleship. And I don't know how feasible this is. I don't have that pastoral lens, so I'm just kind of lobbing it to y'all. But I'm thinking about if you have a church where you've got a number of police officers, if you will, or maybe you have a judge or something like that, or something that somebody in those kind of a role, maybe some political role. I guess I'm asking, does it make sense then I know pastors are busy, but maybe perhaps set aside some time to, just meet with a group of police officers in your church and say, hey, you know what, here's a biblical worldview in terms of how, so rather than viewing the people that you're dealing with as a bunch of perps or whatever, your blue buddies are telling you is the mentality, here's the biblical worldview about how you go about doing, being a police officer, being a judge, so on and so forth. And I'm thinking that because, they may need something specific that may not be covered just in your kind of casual sermon or your average sermon. So maybe having some sort of focus group, the same way we might have a men's group at church or a women's group, having a group for public servants, a public servant group, discipleship, You know, does
Yeah.
that make sense? I mean, like from a pastoral
Yeah,
standpoint, like, what do y'all think?
that makes great sense. I would also add that if a church is big enough to have actually a network of discipleship groups to ensure that those who work in law enforcement are partnered with ex-felons and that they're in the same group together. I think that pastors can and pastoral staff can do the hard work of identifying the members in their church and who they're best suited to be in groups with.
By the
Amen.
way, I just want to comment on two things with two Bible verses that folks said that I want to show people are biblically based. The last thing in regards to pastoral direction from a proper place of gospel theology towards police officers, you have an interesting passage in Luke 3:14 where John the Baptist, listen to what he says to Roman soldiers. So these are the keepers of the peace of their day, who certainly did engage in brutality with those they were in charge over, right? Soldiers also asked him, and we, what shall we do? Now notice he doesn't actually even say leave. He doesn't tell them that, but here's what he does say in John the Baptist. And he said to them, do not extort money from anyone by threats or by false accusation, and be content with your wages. So dealing with some of the specific temptations for people in those kind of authority roles. That's why, bribes, corrupt, be content with your wages. That's why that's in there. False accusation. I mean, I hope that's clear and we could see. I mean, there's videos where we see, and it's not one video. And think about all the times it's not a video. See cops literally plant evidence. Evidence, you know what I'm saying, on people. This is a real thing. Do not extort money from anyone by threats or false accusation. So just in that little thing, and there's other stuff we could take from these principles. And I want to share one other to show that, some of these ideas, there's a biblical principle behind some of this. This one is from Deuteronomy. And so I'm not a theonomist. I want people to understand that as I read these. But I do believe an agreement with being somewhat of a confessional person. The London Baptist Confession of 1689, point 4 in chapter 19 speaks about the general equity of some of the laws which have expired now being of moral use via their general equity. And I take that to be their principle. And so let me just share this one from Deuteronomy chapter 19. I'm just going to read it. And there's one key thing in here, and then I'm going to yield. But I just want to bring this to bear. I hope people know, hey, this is actually rooted somewhere, right? So here we are, Deuteronomy 19. Now, this is Old Testament Israel. So this is expired. There's no theocratic Israel, but the general equity, meaning the principle behind it, is still valid. So we could apply this to American law now, and that's part of what we should do. Listen to this. Verse 15, a single witness shall not suffice against a person for any crime or for any wrong in connection with any offense that he has committed. This would include just the witness of a police officer. Only on the evidence of 2 witnesses or of 3 witnesses shall a charge be established. In our day, I do think we could say this could include certain camera evidence. For example, it could be one of the, in essence, almost as an eye. This is just me working this out as I read this. If a malicious witness arises to accuse a person of wrongdoing, so the lady in Central Park has been referred to. I don't know if you guys know the case. Obviously, the panel does. But to those listening, Amy Cooper, her dog was on a leash. The brother said, put your dog on a leash. She didn't want to put the dog on the leash. She kind of thought the rules didn't apply to her. So he started feeding her dog treats as a way to get her to do it because he had experience with this kind of thing. Owners don't like when someone else gives then they leash their dog. They don't like that. So he started giving the dog treats. She gets on the phone with 911. Think about who does that, right? Well, Amy Cooper did it. She gets on the phone and says, a black man is threatening me and my dog. First of all, it's sort of weird. Like, it's almost like the witch. I'll get you and your dog too. But a black, and if you just heard the audio of the call, you would think this lady's about to die. If you only heard the audio. But fortunately, the brother, whose first name was Christian, he recorded the whole time. She is moving towards him. On this call, he's doing nothing but giving the dog treats. Now, the point is that's what we mean with a false accusation. It's good she got fired. she should get whatever penalty would have been brought upon him. And this is what this says. If a malicious witness arises to accuse a person of wrongdoing, then both parties to the dispute shall appear before the Lord, before the priests and the judges who are in the office of those days. The judges shall inquire diligently. That's an investigation, folks. And if the witness is a false witness and has accused his brother falsely, then you shall do to him as he had meant to do to his brother. So you shall purge the evil from your midst, and the rest shall hear and fear. So people won't be doing this, is what it's saying. It's what's it called? A deterrent. And shall never again commit any such evil among you. Your eye shall not pity. It shall be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. So this could extend all the way to the death penalty by this. It's saying it's equal. But I just wanted to bring those two out to show some basis for how we could draw and say, okay, how do we craft fair laws? Because really, policy's got to change, laws got to change in relationship to this. I just want to share that.
Hey, with that, I gotta apologize. I actually got to slide on out, y'all. I apologize. It'll still be playing on my page, but I apologize. I got to dip on out, y'all.
I do too pretty soon, y'all.
Yeah. I'm not even going to bring questions. I'm sorry, guys. I'm not going to bring the questions from the audience. You guys can inbox them to me, and I'll try my best to answer them, or to anybody on the panel if we have time. But we do have to go. We have gone way over our time. As you can see, we're all very passionate about the subject, and I just want to highlight certain things that were said in this last round, which are: number one, educate yourself as to history, as to proper doctrine, as to your political rights. So many times we feel that we aren't able to affect change, so we don't try. But I just want to let you know that, somebody mentioned it here about when it comes to literacy, right after slavery, how literacy exploded. And it wasn't because we weren't capable of learning. It was because we were being withheld from it. We were being stopped, right? And so the same thing happened in so many different fields when it comes to the Reconstruction era, the early 1900s, right after slavery. I mean, we had a boom. We had politicians. We had our first senators and congressmen. Their parents were on plantations. They themselves, a lot of them, born on plantations, and yet we see them striving straight for the top. And what was the thing that stopped them, that impeded us from continuing in this line, was white supremacy and racism, and the extreme of it. Now, I'm not going to say that white supremacy is an extreme in and of itself, but it does have certain manifestations, such as the KKK and the Knights of White Camellia, which began in response to emancipation. There was no Klan prior to emancipation. They arose because they wanted to hold us back. And so we're watching people getting hung and lynched, voter intimidation at the booths. Let me tell you something. If your voice didn't matter, they wouldn't be going so hard out of their way to stop you. They wouldn't be at the voting polls with guns, or trying to put in grandfather clauses, or trying to disenfranchise Black people, or trying to keep felons from being able to re-enter into society. If your voice did not matter, they wouldn't waste so much time trying to silence you. Your voice matters, okay? If nothing else, we saw, I was giving birth when with the shooting in Florida. I forget the name of the kids. Starts with an F.
Trayvon?
No. With the kids, they went into the school.
The gas
the
station.
shooter. Sanford? No, it's not Sanford.
No.
Oh, Sandy Hook.
No.
Wait,
the
what?
one where it was recent.
The high school. I know what you're talking about now. The high school.
Okay, so the kids after that, they were all over the news within like 3 or 4 days. A week later, they're meeting with senators and congressmen. They're getting laws drafted. They're talking about whether we should have guns allowed at school, whether the teachers should be armed. Immediately, they went to Congress, bruh. They weren't playing games. These, of course, were European American children. They already have this mentality of knowing that their voice has power. They feel licensed to go forward and do these things. My family, you have the same rights. The only thing is, they have tricked you into believing that you don't. And you, just like how we talked about earlier, internalizing white supremacy, right, internalizing negative thoughts about ourselves, we have internalized this, this kind of psychological disenfranchisement where we believe that we do not have a voice. We believe that this is not our country, this is their country, and we're still begging them for things that they've already given us. We already have the right to vote by citizenship. We already have citizenship by birth. This is your country just as much much as it did anybody else's. And the moment you, well, because we've already arrived there, but the moment that you allow them, you relinquish those rights on your own, they don't have to put forth so much of an effort to stop you from doing the things that you're supposed to be doing. So if you want to see change, like the brothers have all here said, you need to go forward and make it happen. Ain't nobody gonna do it for you. You need to make it happen and recognize that your own voice has power. You know, I give this analogy often when I speak to people. If we're outside in the daytime and there's sunlight, the sunlight is there, you know, you can see an ant and the ant just crawls by. You hold up a magnifying glass to that ant and that same sunlight will burn that ant and kill it. We have to unify. We have to put our voices and direct it in a certain area. Brother Damon, Pastor Damon has already given us instruction about legislation as it regards to false calls to the police, when it comes to police brutality, when it comes to this good old boy system. We need to institute special prosecutors so that we don't have to wait for the DA, who is the best friend of the police chief, to arrest their own friends. You know, when we have the Ahmaud Arbery situation, they had those videos for 2 months, just kicking it around from office to office. But when the public saw the video, that's when they decided, okay, maybe we should arrest somebody. That should not have been the case. There needs to be legislation. This is how, I'm gonna say it again, white people get stuff done. You don't see white people just sitting around and commiserating. The first thing they say is, one, I'm gonna pull my money from you. Macy's did an ad yesterday that said Black Lives Matter. You see all the Karens in the comments, cancel my account. I'm no longer shopping here. They understand how money works and the power of that influence, okay? That's number one. Number two, they go straight to the senators, straight to lobbying, straight to whomever it is they feel like can institute laws. It is the laws that create the climate that allow these things to happen. I need you guys to educate yourselves. I'm gonna drop you some films that I want you to watch on Netflix, Hulu, and YouTube, okay? So just a few of them before we go. We're gonna close out with a prayer. I'm gonna ask Brother Vocab to close us out with a prayer. When the levees broke, you need to watch that. You need to watch what happened to the city of New Orleans and how the government responded or failed to when the levees broke. Kids for Cash. Dr. Richardson, Brother Richardson just talked about that, how judges were taking kickbacks for sending kids to jail. These are real things. So many people are so ignorant as to what's going on, and so they think that we're just making these things up. These are documented facts. Kids for Cash. You can go on Amazon Prime and look for COINTELPRO, which is the counterintelligence program, the FBI's program to stop people from unifying. And like basically, it wasn't just Black people. It was Native Americans. It was Latino Americans, people trying to come together and stand up for their rights. The government had a program to silence them. Martin Luther King, the Black Panther Party, all these people were part and parcel listed in those documents, the COINTELPRO documents. The Innocence Project, you need to look them up. They have a film out on Hulu. The guy who leads it, listen, there was a guy on there who was a coroner, and this is just crazy. They have a conviction based on the coroner's testimony alone. The coroner is actually a dentist, okay? He is their blood spatter expert, having gone to a 4-hour training, never actually any schooling on blood spatters, okay? He is also, so he's the coroner, he's a blood spatter expert. He talks to them about bite marks and how bite marks, you can pattern the teeth and prove that somebody raped somebody. All of it turns out to be false. These are the things that are happening, and it's not necessarily behind closed doors, it's happening in our face. We just don't care enough to investigate, okay? So there are a lot of films. If you want some more, hit me up. I don't want to keep you guys all night, but there's so many things out there. There are books, what is it called? Lethal Alliance or something like Dark Alliance. There was a guy who did research. He's an investigator. He did research about how the government shipped in drugs into the country and then penalized Black people. We don't have no boats, bruh. We ain't shipping in no drugs over here. How do the drugs get here? There is a system in place, and I'm not blaming it all on the government and taking the focus away from us, because we do have a responsibility to our own selves and our own community. But I'm just saying, educate yourself. Educate yourself on manufactured consent. That's another book that you can read about how the media basically hypes up things and makes you believe what they want you to believe. Martin Luther King died for the cause. Everybody out here talking about, well, he cheated on his wife and he wasn't no Christian because he didn't believe in the Virgin Mary. Where did you get that from, bruh? Where did you get that from? From the media. So I speak so passionately because right now, you know, all of us are up in arms, and I'm glad that you are, but eventually this too shall pass. This outrage shall pass. And what needs to not happen is that we need to not fall back into complacency just because the media is no longer hyping it up or we no longer see people busting down buildings. So if you're interested in doing more, hit me up in my inbox. I want you guys to check out bcempowered.org, Urban Logia on YouTube, Vocab's YouTube channel. The BK Apologist is also on YouTube. If you're watching this on Facebook, this is also live streaming on the True ID Apologetics YouTube channel. We live this life. We're talking about these things every day. Okay, there are people out there who need these answers, and it's not just only us. There are many apologists out there, but this is a good resource to start with. And I just pray that you guys keep your eyes open. Lord have mercy, please. I beg you, do not let this situation pass and then you go back to sleep and wait for somebody else to get shot or murdered on live TV before you start trying to do something about it. Go right now and look up how to draft legislation and how to sit down with police chiefs, how to get policies in place both locally and at the state level. And may God bless you and lead you as you do so.
Now, real quick, a couple of books that I also want to suggest. This book here is backwards to you, but this is The Social Teaching of the Black Churches.
It's
this
not
is a
backwards.
phenomenal book. And then this book here is Frustrated Fellowship, the Black Baptist Quest for Social Power. These two books, I understand it's backwards for you, but these two books are phenomenal books to learn about.
It looks right.
Huh?
It looks right.
It is.
Right.
Good. Two phenomenal books to learn how the Black church historically has engaged these issues.
Yes. All right, y'all ready to pray? Right. And then when I say amen, I'm gonna hit that end button. All right, let's pray then. Father, we come to you in the name of Jesus and the power of the Spirit, recognizing that you have made all people in the image of God and thanking you for that reality. Thank you, Lord, that we have something to stand on. Your word based upon who you are. God, you are beautiful in every facet, perfectly holy. And you've given us a word to reveal how you are, your character. And so, God, we have a yearning, a desire to have laws that reflect holiness and reflect truth, because we see you, we see who you are. That's how it's supposed to be. Dear Lord, when we see the way you taught us to pray with the Lord's Prayer, that's part of thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. You don't have police brutality in heaven. There's not unfairness and inequality and injustice in your sight or in your kingdom. So let us be a people who live that out now. God, we realize we're pilgrims longing for a city far away that's not here yet, but the kingdom of God is coming to earth, and you're using your people to do that. We believe that. We recognize even when we do get justice on this earth, it's still proximate, yet we strive for it, because ultimately you're the judge. But yet we're supposed to have courts and systems and authorities that reflect that final reality. And God, to the atheist and the unbeliever, they feel outraged when they see this. I pray they're convicted when they realize they have no real reason other than some emotional response based upon their thinking about these issues. But that's not true, because you've made them in your image. Romans 1 is why they feel that way. God, I pray they see that and realize that, and it drives them to the gospel, a place where they can find true, solid rock foundation. The gospel is the only answer for this. And dear Lord, we thank you that you've given us a hope, and it's secure, and it's a foundation. It's based upon you and your perfect nature. God, we recognize that you teach us this. We see the Beatitudes in Matthew chapter 5, and we say along with you as you teach us, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. This is true. We ask for true justice, and God, let us be your instruments to bring it. In your name, amen.
Amen.